So hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy. No idea what happened to the last stream that I was just trying to sort of go through. I think someone said it was a communist plot. Most likely I think the tankies are onto it. But unfortunately I have no idea why I cut out, and hopefully this stream is now working. So yeah, probably just going to share it around and then we'll continue reviewing à-bas-le-ciel's terrible video on communism. It's like, for someone who I think, is incredibly well educated, I think this is just a really shit take, if I'm honest. But what can you do other than, tell them why it's terrible? Communism. But yeah, like if anyone, like if you did want this, someone go and tell à-bas-le-ciel if they want, like just go and let them know. Right. So I hope hello everyone and welcome back. Hiya Ethan and hiya Taint. So yeah, let's just get back into reviewing à-bas-le-ciel's terrible video on communism. Really sorry that video got the stream died. I have no idea why. But yeah, we're just gonna get back into it. I have no idea what happened. Like, to be entirely honest with you, the stream didn't even cut out for me. It just kept going. But yeah, a bit quiet. All right, is that better? Yeah, no idea what happened, guys. But we're gonna continue with à-bas-le-ciel's terrible takes on communism. You know what, shit? We'll just restart it as well, just for everyone involved. Someone go and tell à-bas-le-ciel. Just because I don't know if I'm even saying his name right. Isel, I think that's your name. Please get better takes on communism and Marxism. Yeah, like, we're not all tankies, man. So yeah, if everyone ready for a nice review, let's see. Actually, I think I might see. I have him in a server. Do I share a server with IB? I think I do. I'll see if he's around. I'll see if I can just add him. Just let him know. Where the hell? What server was it? Oh shit! Well, if anyone wants them to know, go and basically let them know. But yeah, let's get into this. Let's review this again.
Patrice Cullors is a Marxist. All right, y'all. I mean, let's just talk about it. Am I a Marxist? I'm a lot of things. I do believe in Marxism. It's a philosophy that I learned really early on in my organizing career.
This is December 15th, 2020, and interestingly, part of the political context for this announcement, which comes as no surprise to those of us who have been following the political history of Black Lives Matter closely, is that The Economist magazine published their estimate that total donations to Black Lives Matter causes exceeds 10 billion.
Yeah, basically I did see this in the last stream. Essentially, that is a lot of money. I do think Black Lives Matter lacks direction. I do think that it lacks clear leadership in terms of actually having overall legislative goals that it needs to kind of fixate on. I think that it's not focused on the right kind of prejudice, the prejudicial nature of the United States. I think that I would say that the overall bias and what's the word, exploitation of well, not exploitation, there's a word I'm looking for and it's just totally escaped us. The racism essentially that's happening in the United States is not within it's within the criminal justice system, but it's not within the police force. I don't think it's a matter of police brutality, but more conviction rates and basically sentences. I think it's more to do with courts and how that's kind of going on rather than police brutality. From the statistics I've seen and from doing a little bit of background research, Obviously, as I say, I could do with doing more, but from what I've seen, it's not focused on the right points, essentially.
US dollars. That does not mean that this particular activist has $10 billion at her disposal. It does not mean that any one agency or organization received $10 billion. This is a category of agencies associated with this cause. However, it is fair to say that she is someone with tremendous power and influence and basically a bottomless budget to work with.
Well,
I don't know.
I think that's a bit like, don't get me wrong. I have no idea how much money and influence this person has in terms of like bottomless budget and so on. Bit of a jump to say that like she has a bottomless budget, but like she probably has a considerable amount of influence and money. Don't disagree with them there, but at the same time, it's a bit much to say bottomless budget. Like she's probably richer than both of us. Don't get us wrong.
Communism, because it just has such a bad rap.
Well, because it's failed every time. That's why it has a bad
But
rap.
so has capitalism.
It's very tempting to respond to this sort of self-righteous ignorance by immediately pointing to the human casualties of communism, by pointing to the proverbial millions of corpses, the huge piles of skulls, for example, here in Cambodia. I don't...
Like, as I said before, like, obviously there are many people who actually did suffer and die under communism because of communism. No doubt. First thing I would like to say is we need to just wipe China off that list. China, I mean, don't get me wrong, China, like, when China was kind of communist, essentially, yeah, the deaths could be attributed to communism, but China now is not communist. China is a combination of totalitarianism and capitalism. It's more fascist than communist. I think that's obvious. I don't know if you would argue against that. The USSR, obviously, that's communist, and the USSR is accountable for many millions of deaths, and many people who were socialists and communists could not believe what was going on in the USSR. Like people in Germany and the rest of Europe, for example, did not want to believe the horrors of what was going on in the Stalinist regime. And I think that alone shows that many communists and socialists, even at the time, would not have taken the approach of someone like Stalin, Lenin, or Trotsky. Many of them weren't revolutionaries in terms of wanting to, harm other individuals or annihilate a certain social class, or anything like that. I think that blanking it all with like communism, socialism, Marxism, just basically saying like everyone who follows this kind of like left-leaning ideology is under this same like kind of like death toll. They are all responsible equally is nonsense. I think that what you have to kind of realize is that there are many different forms of communism and socialism. Primarily, like one of the I'm a market socialist, for example, or an anarcho-syndicalist. Basically very much similar to someone like Chomsky, and I think following that philosophy would not produce anywhere near these deaths. And it just doesn't also take into consideration that like someone that's an anarcho-syndicalist doesn't even believe in like governmental control, and many of these have been done by state apparatus, by a vanguard class, a communist party, you know what I mean, a totalitarian state. And if we were to remove the totalitarian aspects, from these these nations, how much damage would the pure economics have caused? And I would bet that the economic damage, the amount of individuals who starved and died under these communist regimes would have been far less than those individuals who have starved and died, for example, under the capitalist regimes, which I think I read recently, I think it was in the Black Book of Capitalism, that there was over 100 million deaths that were attributable to capitalism. And even if we don't take that to be the case, we can at least say that the proxy wars from the United States, for example, I think were attributed to about 2 million deaths in Iraq and Iraq alone, and then that's not even considering the deaths in like Vietnam, the deaths in the North Korean conflict, the deaths in the proxy wars in which they funded other groups to fight one another, or supplied arms, for example, to groups like Saudi Arabia, which the British government were doing to basically drop on, I think, Lebanon. and we're not even considering these atrocities that are going on within capitalism as well. I think it's absolutely wrong to just attribute atrocity to communism when there are so many atrocities within capitalism that are equally as vile and disgusting. And what we have to recognize is that there have been a lot of failed communist states, absolutely, and many of which I would wholeheartedly disagree with even the foundational philosophy of those states. You know, Stalinism, for example, is repugnant. And not all socialists believe in those kind of philosophies. And this person, I don't know what she believes in, but she very well might be an anarchist, for example. She might she might have she might be like an Orwellian, like homage to Catalonian kind of person. You know, I don't know what she believes in. She mightn't be like a tanky, like a Trotskyite or a Leninist or Leninist or Stalinist or anything. She might just be a market socialist or something. You have no idea. She might even mean democratic socialism in terms of, like Scandinavian economies. You don't know necessarily what she's trying to convey. So like to really say, like, it's so insensitive to call yourself a Marxist, blah 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 blah. Well, Marx didn't do any of this, right? And Marxist philosophy wasn't the reason why this happened necessarily. Like, Marxist doctrine, I think, although inspired many of the groups that did commit many of these atrocities, I think it's unfair to characterize all communists as being, or all Marxists even, as basically even being connected to these atrocities. I think it's and it would be like saying that all capitalism is the same. All capitalism is not the same, right? Like, we have to recognize that the type of capitalism that exists within the United States, for example, is very different to the kind of capitalism that exists in Sweden and in Norway. So if we can even acknowledge that there are differences in economic systems even within capitalism, then, and that is an established system, then in terms of theoretical systems such as within Marxism and communism, there are so many differences and varieties of theory alone, without, like, obviously, like, practice, that, like, to accuse someone of being insensitive for promoting a certain economic form of distribution, I think is just a bit nonsense, Eisel. I think you need to read a little bit more about socialism than to attribute these deaths to it.
I don't understand how it's possible in the year 2020 for an influential, highly educated, highly funded political leader like Patrisse Cullors to be so insensitive. I just don't understand it. And, it wasn't just Cambodia's tragedy. It was the whole world's tragedy. Like, I understand her political position. I grew up in a family where the majority of people around me were Marxists and were even hardcore communists, not just my parents, but aunts and uncles and people like that. I have grown up surrounded by people with this mentality, people who are...
Well, I don't know what you've grown up being surrounded by, Eisel, but, like, it's not representative of all socialism and communism.
Are willing to commit to making these excuses for mass murder. But couldn't you have some sensitivity? Couldn't you have some compassion?
Well, I think she does have sensitivity and compassion, which is probably why she's advocating for socialism, because the whole point of socialism really is to essentially remove the economic confinements that are being placed upon individuals from the capitalist state. I mean, the fact that people cannot receive healthcare, for example, or receive adequate food, water, and shelter within an economy which can easily provide such amenities to individuals is an atrocity in and of itself. When we look at the world, at the global economy, and I know, like, people like to point out, it's growing faster than it ever has before. Well, so's inequality. And although we have people elevating out of poverty, we also have greater amounts of poverty accumulating even in the West. If we look at rates of homelessness, for example, within economies like the United States, how can we not point out the economic inadequacies of these systems? I mean, like, absolutely the case. It's absolutely the case that individuals in the United States are being exploited and being treated unfairly. I mean, the fact that the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States, and bankruptcy is fairly high in the United States, by the way, is medical bankruptcy because of their insurance-based system, is atrocious. It's the largest economy in the world, and yet it's exploiting its population for its basic needs. I mean, if you're an epileptic in the United States and you're poor, you may be very well rationing your medication just to stay alive. That is absolutely disgusting. You are being coerced into paying corporations the majority of your income just to maintain a basic standard of living, which is absolutely unfair, especially since you are being exploited every day in work. And we're not even talking about the psychological alienation of the worker. We're not talking about the economic alienation of the worker, or even the alienation of the worker from politics. You know, the fact that like our democratic systems are controlled by money, the fact that our infrastructure is owned by, you know, corporations and that the public have no control over, the fact that even our basic economic system, like the federal banks, for example, are now privately owned and not publicly owned. Our very currency is now owned by select groups of individuals who get to dictate certain, like essentially the foundations of our economy to us. All of that is being bypassed within capitalism, apparently, like in this video. Like, he's not even considering the fact that there are just as many horrors in capitalism as there are in communism. And like, you know, you say what you want about communists, and don't get me wrong, I pointed this out in the last stream. I wouldn't want to live in somewhere like East Germany, but like even in East Germany, you are, a job is a human right. In this communist regime, childcare was a right. Holidays, if you like, were provided by the state. Everyone was given like a certain amount of time off, and like there are advantages to communism that, don't get me wrong, it didn't like outweigh the damage and horrors that it caused within the 20th century. Absolutely not. But at the same time, we can at least admire the fact that in terms of some social benefits, there was social benefits for being existing in a communist country. And many of the people like from what I'm aware, communist USSR look back towards the USSR, like in Russia, with a form of nostalgia, because they had better lives. Like, they didn't exist in as much poverty, and that's many of the individuals like that existed in the USSR. And don't get me wrong, I do think that like the tanky Trotskyite Leninist, Stalinist regimes were disgusting, but at the same time, we can appreciate that the damage that people like, for example, George W. Bush, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, all of these, political figures in recent years have done to the world is at least comparable to the damage of these nations.
Couldn't you have some human dignity when dealing with this issue, if that is your political position? But to take a step beyond these mind-boggling numbers, let's just talk about the kind of mediocre middle ground of communism for a moment.
Yeah, so in case anyone didn't say it, like, he actually goes on to talk about Vietnam being the middle ground between communism and capitalism, when really he's actually just talking about breeding totalitarianism with capitalism, which is something like the Vietnamese government have done. It's something that the Chinese government have done. It's not communism, it's just capitalism, but with a totalitarian government.
Right now, in the year 2020, would you be more excited about going to a university in Vietnam than you would be excited about going to a university in Japan?
Again, it's not comparable. Like, what he should have done, if he wanted to be legitimate and sincere about this comparison, is to compare somewhere like Vietnam against somewhere with a similar level of GDP, like essentially the similar economic size, just to give you an adequate comparison of between nations. I think it's unfair to compare like the third largest economy in the world with one of the most advanced education systems in the world to somewhere like Vietnam, which is at best a second world country.
If I offered you a fully paid scholarship to get a PhD in Japan, you have to live in Japan for, let's say, 4 years, or a scholarship to get a PhD in Vietnam, think for a minute. You can...
The food's better in Vietnam, like, if that's any consideration.
Do some Google searches. If you were going to go spend 4 years of your life in Vietnam under communism today, under the unbelievably mild, diluted, mixed economy form of communism that exists today, I mean, Vietnam is now a hybrid of communism and capitalism. Still, you would be choosing to move to a very dangerous place where you have no freedom of speech, where you have none of the civil rights or political rights you take for granted in Japan or South Korea. How about Cuba? Would you be excited at the prospect of going to get a university degree in Cuba, even now, even today?
Well, I think, again, like, obviously he's talking about countries that are actually moving away from the prior communist regimes and becoming capitalist. But even if, like, as I said, like in the last stream when I was talking about this, like Cuba, for example, Cuba was being absolutely wrecked by the United States, which is how it became a communist country in the first place, because it was being exploited by the United States, and sort of rejected that the cronyism, which was, you know, perpetuating basically a Las Vegas kind of mentality to how they were treating Cuba. People, the rich and the wealthy, the famous, would go over to Cuba, basically treat them like shit, the Cubans like shit, use their resources, their infrastructure, use it as a playground, and then would, you know, fuck off back to the United States. And the Cubans got very much sick of that and rebelled, created a communist state, and then were forced to ally themselves with the USSR to protect themselves from the United States. So in many ways, the fact that the Cuban state ended up the way it did was actually the result of capitalism and a rejection of the exploitative environment that it was propagating. But also, it's important to recognize that Cuba, although it has its many drawbacks in terms of civil rights and human rights and so on, I will say, did have some advantages. For example, like the Cuban state at the minute still has more doctors than many other Latin American countries that it's comparable against. Its economy is still better than many of the other Latin Americans that it's comparable against, and it's and that was existing in relative isolation. I mean, it wasn't able to trade with the United States for a long time, and with many other nations, it didn't have very good trade. So if you look at like the position that Cuba has been placed in, the fact that it's done as well as it has is actually surprising. And many people even go on health tourism from the United States to Cuba to receive treatment, because the Cubans have healthcare which is cheaper and more affordable for individuals who are being heavily exploited within the United States. So even then, like, you can point out, yes, you know, Cuba is not as good as somewhere like Japan, or not as good as somewhere even like the United States in terms of education, maybe, and civil liberties. But the fact that individuals from the world's largest economy are having to go on health tourism to a much poorer nation to afford healthcare just shows that there are economic drawbacks to capitalism that are just as great as the social drawbacks of the totalitarian communist regimes. And I reject both of them. I think they're both vile and disgusting. I think that I wouldn't want I wouldn't want a totalitarian government just as much as I don't want a corrupt corporate environment. Both of them are unjust and unethical, and so the socialism that I would profess to support, in terms of anarcho-syndicalism, would reject both of those power structures. And this woman might very well support a very similar form of socialism as I do. So saying that, you know, like, she is in any way comparable to Marxists and Leninists and Trotskyites and so on, who've propagated nations like Cuba, the USSR, and other totalitarian regimes, it's just nonsense.
And how would you have felt in, say, the 1950s? You know, back when communism was really murdering all these people, back when communism was in its much more repressive, much more authoritarian phase. How would you have felt about devoting 4 years of your life to living in Russia, to living in communist China, to living in a place where you had none of the freedoms, none of the civil rights that you can take for granted in the Western world? How would you feel about the difference?
Well, I mean, like, the civil rights that you take advantage in the Western world, I mean, like there were atrocities back then that were happening in terms of civil rights in the Western world. We're going to bypass the fact that the civil rights movement of the United States, in terms of, you know, racial equality, hadn't happened yet. That black people were being exploited as shit. I mean, it depends on what race you were, I suppose, when you're making this claim. I'd certainly rather be a black person in many of the communist states that were committing, you know, these acts than I would have been in the United States at that time. And I'm not even defending these regimes, by the way. I do think they are disgusting. It's just the fact that, like, it doesn't matter. Like, essentially, it's a double standard to hold communist regimes to a different standard than you would hold any capitalist regime. the fact that capitalism has been just as socially exploitative in many ways as communism, especially when we go back historically, is absolutely, it's incredibly obvious. I mean, the fact that the worker movement in the United States, for example, were crushed violently, the fact that the United States, even in the time of the 1950s, I mean, even before this, I mean, like if you look, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, many of these Western countries were actively propagating their capitalist social interests over democracy, toppling democratically elected leaders, funding proxy wars, but also funding organizations which challenged governments, undermining worker movements, and undermining even, like, for example, social revolutions. I mean, if we look at like Spain and so on, America, Britain, and France actively undermined the anarchists, and so did the communists, actually, for that matter, undermined the anarchists. And in reality, if we look at like anarchism and the value set that it actually holds and the way that it was implementing those values in Catalonia, there is no reason that it should have been undermined. The reason that they undermined it was because it wasn't beneficial to the power structures that wanted to take control of that area, of that location. And like essentially here we are. The reality is that the governments that are capitalist and trying to fulfill like the capitalist mandate of like propping up certain corporate interests above others, above human rights, for example, have been perpetuated throughout the last century. How many wars have we been in that have had nothing to do with like the value of human life, but have had everything to do with trying to make as much money as possible? Are we going to pretend that these atrocities are not that capitalism is not culpable for these atrocities?
Between living in East Germany versus West Germany under communism, or still today, how would you feel?
I mean, like, okay, like the East German, West Germany, right? Look, right. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate that the Adenauer government was a great government. It was impressive, and to be even clear, the fact that it implemented very many worker-orientated policies which aided its economic growth, for example, giving workers increased control of corporations, which was ultimately a somewhat left-leaning policy in the Adenauer government, aided the economy. But what really aided the West German economy was the shit ton of money the United States pumped into it to place it as a bulwark against the East German economy. I mean, like, you just need to do like a basic history lesson, and you will see that the West German economy was not the result of capitalism giving people like better lives and so on, but was the result of the West pumping as much money as possible into West Germany in order to, one, entice people on the communist side as to having a better life and create social instability, but also as a way of protecting the economic interests of Western Europe against the looming communist threat. And this was something planned out. The thing is, you look at East Germany. East Germany had its entire industrial system basically destroyed, right? The Russians went in there, and by and large, by the way, let's remember that the fascists who existed in Germany, the capitalists, the Nazis who existed in Germany prior to the invasion of the Russian and the Allied forces, had absolutely annihilated the Russian population. I mean, the fact that the Russians had like 3 times as many deaths as it had more. The Russians had more deaths than the Americans, the French, the Germans, and the British put together. So the amount of deaths that happened to the Russians, the amount of damage that happened to the Russian state was incomprehensible. So the anger that they felt against the Germans, the righteous anger that they felt against the Germans, needs to be considered here, and their approach to how they treated East Germany when they got it. But even if we didn't consider that, the agreement, the political agreement actually from the Allied forces upon entering West Germany was to deindustrialize it and turn it into an agricultural nation in terms of both sides of Germany when they split Germany in half. they were going to turn Germany into an agricultural nation in order to prevent future invasions, because they had already invaded in World War I and II, and that was an agreement that had been made from the West and with Russia. But instead, instead of actually deindustrializing the West Germany, America pumped as much money in, breaking the agreement with Stalin and so on, pumped as much money as possible into West Germany to create a bulwark to protect the Western interests, the Western European and American interests from the looming threat of communism. And so, in many ways, the thing is that Stalin didn't actually break his side of the deal. He actually did remove the industrialization of East Germany, and so East Germany was economically crippled because that was the plan, whilst West Germany was economically bolstered. And so you had this massive disparity between West Germany and East Germany from the get-go. And then obviously East Germany then had to compete against West Germany to try and reindustrialize and create a state that was in any way comparable. And at least you can say that in East Germany there was schemes that were worth. I'm not defending Stalinism. No, I'm just that everyone know. I'm definitely not defending Stalinism. I'm just saying that there's historical context to West Germany and East Germany, because he brought up East Germany. It's far more complex than East Germany was communist. And that's why it failed. I mean, actually, the East German economy was starting to rebuild, and then there was a massive issue with oil, and the economy like tanked. Like, it just went just gone. Like the political and the politics and economics of East Germany cannot be boiled down to East Germany was communist whilst West Germany was capitalist. It doesn't work like that. In fact, one of the main things that most people consider is, how did the USSR go from a backward agricultural nation, right, like incapable of almost self-sustaining, with many individuals in the country starving, to the second most powerful country in the world, if this economic system was incapable of producing, incapable of like mass production and economic growth. The issues that happened with communism weren't issues economically in terms of its economic prowess and able to sustain, like, for example, a militaristic environment. The issues of communism were with how it treated individuals in terms of civil rights and freedoms, which I do not deny. I think Stalinism was disgusting, and I think that, as I've said, that like these tanky kind of communists are vile, but like it's not as straightforward as just one side was communist, one side was capitalist.
About the difference between living in North Korea and living in South Korea. And right now, let's be honest, in North Korea, as bad as it is, there are no piles of skulls like this. No, Patrice, there's a really meaningful sense in which communism has been a failure. And you can't just turn around and say that capitalism equally has been a failure.
I think you can absolutely turn around and say capitalism has equally been a failure, with just the amount of wars and proxy wars that we've had, with the amount of deaths that we've had in the most developed nations in the world unnecessarily, the amount of exploitative labor that continues to be propagated within the world, the way that we will, like, for example, we'll call China communists, and yet they do not enforce any workers' rights, for example, and all the Western companies and if you're just going to a shop today, you will see like made in China on most of the products there, because we have exported productive capitalism to China so that we can have a service-based economy and take advantage of low consumptive costs, so that we can get like products for cheap, so that we can benefit from consuming these like these basic everyday products, whilst the individuals within the factories that are producing them aren't even getting the most basic needs met. These are problems of these are problems of capitalism, and they need to be addressed. Like, don't get me wrong, like I completely agree that there are issues with communism, right? Like, anyone in their right mind would say, like, if you look back at the 20th century, there were horrors of communism. You can't look back to Stalin and go, oh, what a great guy. Like, it's just totally fine. No, it was disgusting. It was brutal. The amount of the middle class that were killed alone, it was wrong. It was absolutely wrong. But when we look at someone like, for example, when we look at, let's say, like the capitalist regimes of the United States committing atrocities by toppling democracies or committing proxy wars or actively invading other nations like we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, we can't say that these economically motivated actions are not the result of capitalism and are not culpable to the capitalist state and are failures of capitalism. That capitalism has to take this as its critique, that they are horrible events ongoing today. That the fact that there are 3 billion people? I think is it 2 billion people? I think it's 2 billion people in the world, in the global economy, that are living on less than $1 a day. That is not the fault of communism. That is the fault of capitalism. So I'd say capitalism has been a remarkable failure.
It's just not true.
We can't allow for fear to dictate how we understand what's possible. You want to know a funny fact? Everybody called Dr. Martin Luther King a communist.
Martin Luther King was like a socialist. He started, he was like kind of like this kind of Catholic socialist. And like he said, one of the most famous things that he said, I think not long before his death, was when you start asking, he's like basically, why are poor Americans being sent to kill poor Americans in Vietnam, like poor Vietnamese people? And he said, when you start asking these questions, you start asking questions of equality and challenging the system as a whole, right? And not long after he was killed. But I don't know why, and like it might have been racism, it might have been because of the promoting of socialism and like starting to join like socialist organizations and other socialist activists of the time. But ultimately, I'd say the guy, like from what I've seen, like Martin Luther King was at least what's the word, sympathetic to socialism. I think that's pretty obvious. And the guy, like, if I'm honest, like, is a brilliant guy. Like, he did many great things, and there have been many great socialists who've existed. There've been many good capitalists even. It just, when we're talking about the disparities between the economic systems, which one is right and which one is wrong, we have to relate this not just to simple case studies of communism throughout the 20th century, but also understand like what socialism could be if we were to implement it today. Now we knowing now what we do, and obviously understanding, relationships between like the individual and their government, for example. For example, something like anarcho-syndicalism implemented in somewhere like Britain would have a much greater difference than something like Stalinism implemented in Britain. And the amount of and the economic effects alone would be astronomically different. Something like market socialism and having greater amounts of worker cooperatives and worker engagement and a democratized economy could be very beneficial to the people of Britain and prevent aspects of poverty and exploitation that are happening every day within this capitalist economy. And I think that we have to take responsibility for these failures of capitalism and seek to remedy them. Otherwise, we are just willing to exist within this half-baked system. I mean, come on, you've got to admit, like ISIL, there has to be something better than what we have now. There are too many poor people in the world. There are too many people being exploited. There are too many people being crushed under like big corporate entities who are not considering them as individuals, but instead trying to use them as a means to an end to bolster their profit margins in their stocks. Like, there has to be something better than this. Thank you guys for sending us this video. Let ISIL know that if he wants to debate the merits of socialism versus capitalism, or anything like of what he's said in this video, I'm really happy to debate it. I don't think the guy knows very much. Like, considering that he was apparently raised by socialists, he doesn't know very much about it. So yeah, if he wants to debate it, then I'm more than willing. If there's anything else you just want us to review, just let us know, and I'll just get back to the AMA. So yeah. Ooh. Right. So guys, so. Right. Oh, what did you think of the review? Did you like the review? And if anyone has any questions, just drop them into the chat, and I'll get to them. If you want your question answered, first, then you can leave a donation, and I'll answer your question as a priority. So yeah, and the donation link, which should have been pinned but is not. Copy link address. So yeah, if anyone wants to leave a donation to support the channel, and wants to have them and have that question answered sooner, they can do so by following the link that is in the chat and is pinned. So yeah. Whoosh, I'm glad you found the video interesting. Very happy to hear that. Brainstorm says, hello, I don't know if you answered this in the previous stream. You didn't upload it, so I will ask again. Have you watched Fight Club? If you have, what are your thoughts on it? I haven't really seen like Fight Club like entirely. I've only seen parts of Fight Club, believe it or not. I feel terrible for saying that because it's such everyone proclaims it as like this massively like monumental like piece of cinematography, like this like Fight Club is amazing, and yet I've just never seen it, and it's like I don't know why. It's not something I'm avoiding watching. Like I want to watch it, but like I just never find the time to do it. Like it's so. I don't game anymore. I don't watch movies. I feel like I just live a life that is either work or stressing about not working, and that's just the entirety of my existence kind of summed up. So yeah, but if anyone's got a question, just drop your question in the chat, and I'll answer it. Very good debunking of the video I found. Oh, thank you very much. I think that you could do with having a look at like the Black Book of Capitalism. Gotta close the stream and watch it now. Unfortunately, I have to somehow survive. Please donate. I'm gonna turn off that part of like my the bot 1 second, because everyone keeps like linking stuff, and I didn't actually mean to block the links. Leave your questions in the chat and I will get to them. Someone go and tell Isel I'll debate him. I don't know how to get in touch with the guy. The guy needs to learn some things about communism and socialism, man. So actually, I've just started. I think I was just telling people I just started reading Trotsky, Terror. It's actually Zizek on Trotsky. I think it's terrorism, and is it terrorism and communism? I think. Go to me Audible library. Yeah, terrorism and communism. I've never read it before. So yeah, like let's see how it goes. I'm an undergrad in, I'm assuming is it in philosophy? It depends on what your undergrad's in and what you plan on doing with your life. Bald monk gaming. Because if you go and get a master's, for example, like I would say try and make it so that it's like advantageous towards your future career. Because we do live in capitalism, we do need to make sure that we are economically stable for the future. I don't want to say, yeah, absolutely, do a master's in philosophy. By the way, good luck getting employed. It's not like that. Like, obviously, do what is obviously in your best interest as well. Isel has a Discord. Well, if someone wants to go and like, someone just drop the link for his Discord or something in chat, and I'll see if I can get him on for a debate and we can have a discussion. Yeah, why the hell not, man? Anyway, Where the hell have I was in the middle of, oh yeah, well, it depends, like, obviously, like, I'd say that, like, doing a master's in philosophy was really great for me. I loved my master's. I did a taught master's. I would always recommend doing a taught master's. It's something that I got recommended. It's something that I would recommend many others. I think that doing it taught gives you just a better education for the most part. Like, you get, like, kind of guided through a little bit more, and it lets you basically have, like, a foundation for what you kind of got to go and do. And I would say as well, pick, like, the topic areas that you're interested in with the masters. Make sure that you're picking stuff that, like, ultimately benefits you. But I think most of all, don't do the same thing again. Like, just don't do the same exact sort of, like, thing again, unless you're trying to deepen your understanding of a particular thinker or a particular field. Like, try and branch out and, like, kind of, like, add some strings to your bow, as it were. That's basically what I would recommend. But ultimately, I found my master's degree great. I found it way better than undergrad because people were actually engaged in philosophy at masters. Like, you were actively able to debate people, like, at masters. That's what I found. Well, in undergrad, like for example, I'm not exaggerating here, but this is what would happen. Like, the lecturer would encourage debate. They would say, answer this question, what do you think of this, whatever. And then somebody would, is supposed to, like, put the hand up, basically give a position. And a lot of the time people would, like, some people would do it. I was one of the people that would do it, like another few guys that would do it. But ultimately there wasn't very much group engagement. And when there was, they would present an argument. And then one lecturer in particular would say, like, has anyone got a response to that? Right? Like, they'll be like, have you got a response, like a counter argument? And a lot of the time I did have a counter argument, and I'd say my counter argument, and then we were trying to open a discourse. But then it would be, I would say a counter argument, and then they'd just be like, no, I don't really have a response. Or essentially, like, they wouldn't even be interested in responding. They didn't have a stake in it more than anything, which seems to be a little bit sad. It's almost like they didn't really care about philosophy, and it's like, well, why are you here? Like, most people, when they were asked as well, like, why did you do philosophy, they were like, oh, I don't know, it was like I was doing okay in it at, like, A level, or, like, I don't know, it was like I don't know, I just wanted, like, a stopgap before I go to work. And it's like, right, like, you're not interested in this course at all. Why are you here? Like, this isn't, like, why you go to university. You go to university because either you're heavily interested in the topic area, or because this is going to be the career goal, like, you're going to go down. And it was kind of both for me. Like, I wanted to be a professor, and I'm incredibly interested in philosophy. And it's just unbelievable how many people that do degrees and just do not give a fuck about any of it. It's like, do not go to university, man, if you do not care about what you're studying, or you do not need it for work. Like, do not do it to yourself even. Why are you getting in debt for this? To live the quote-unquote student lifestyle. I am sorry, right? You can live for £40,000 that you've just gotten yourself into debt for a lot better than a shitty student experience. The student experience is, like, okay, right? Like, I get it. It's like, all right, so you got to have a good time with your friends, except it's not really your friends. Actually, you like, many people who I knew moved out hated the people they moved out with. So it's not like, oh yeah, I met my best friend and I'm friends for life with them. It's like, a lot of the time it's like, I was stuck with 5 people I fucking hated. Like, and then, like, you know what I mean? Like, nobody talks about that. And so, like, oh, is that à-bas-le-ciel? Northern English. I'm a Geordie, à-bas-le-ciel. It's Isel, isn't it? I don't know if I'm saying your name right. Yeah, I'm a Geordie, but that was quite nicely picked up there. I do get called Scottish a lot, actually. Especially when I get excited, I do get called Scottish a lot. Even Irish. I've been called Irish before. I've been called Welsh. Uh, uh, oh, that's good. It's mind blowing that you take a 400 level course on Plato and nobody does the required reading on Plato. Like, absolutely. Like, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like, as well, like, Plato is one of those ones where it's not even that bad to like read. It's a you be like one of the big things was just getting anyone to read at all at university, and a lot of the people I spoke to had like, don't get me wrong, I understand like when you go into university you mightn't have done any like background reading on like the overall topic area. You've done an A level perhaps, but you're not really properly like introduced to it. But then you get people who they go to university and they do not give a fuck. They're taking a £9,000 a year course and they don't give a shit about what they're studying. It's unbelievable. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that like that you've experienced that. Like, honestly, like credit to you, because I'm terrible at languages, but I'm not surprised that it's not limited to philosophy. It seems like it's actually quite widespread. I saw people from quite a few disciplines actually complaining about this, especially when you get like higher up. I think you're a professor, aren't you? It seems to be that like only the people who care about being academics actually give a fuck about the whatever it is they're studying. I think the general population just use university as a stopgap for going to work, which actually brings us round to maybe my critique of your video. I do actually think capitalism is at least as bad as the communism that you criticized. And don't get me wrong, I also am incredibly critical of those communist regimes that you put on the screen. Like, for example, like Stalinism. Like, fuck Stalinism, right? It's disgusting, it's evil, it's cruel. But capitalism has been a cancer in many ways upon the world. So let's not get all kissy over education. We can talk via Skype sometime. You probably already know a lot about me and my background in philosophy and politics. If you want to talk today, even, I'm available. Well, yeah, I mean, like, I'm free right now if you're free. Does anyone want to see a discussion between me and Isel? Whoa. I don't know what Streamlabs did to you there, Isel, but I'll sort that out. I don't know what you said to trigger that. Human, all too human. You're a big fan of Nietzsche, actually, aren't you? Like, I think you mentioned that before. But if you want to talk, like, yeah, I'll send you me Skype. Do you have like Discord or anything? I can even like I'll send the Discord link. You can just let's put that in chat, and that way you can either just messages on Discord or like do it via Skype. I'm happy to do it via Skype. And we can just chat this out. Email's fine. I mean, yeah, I just want to make sure, like, I don't want you to like dox yourself in me chat or anything. Yeah, happy to do just audio anyway. Like, happy with that. But it's up to you if you want to be video. Like, obviously, I can put video on. Do you mind streaming the conversation? Is that all right, Isel? Obviously, we'll keep things amicable. I'm sure. Like, I don't think either of us are going to be fucking arseholes. And yeah, people still use Skype. I use Skype, man. Like, the only issue was, until recently, Skype's security was shit. I know because me and my girlfriend got like hacked. It was like my girlfriend really. She got like really hacked and stuff, and like Skype security used to be fucking terrible. There wasn't even two-factor authentication, so like people could just basically like email Skype and just go, "I've been locked out my account. I need to change my password," and then they're like, "Okay," and they would just let them change the password, like no questions asked. Absolutely fucking terrible. Did I not send the link in chat there? The link for the Discord's there. Isel. I thought I sent it in chat before. I mustn't have. No, I didn't. Sorry about that, man. I'll message you one second. Hey man. Right. Do you wanna? Shall I just call you on Discord? Oh, you just want to go on the chill voice chat? Yeah, sure. Actually, you know, I might even be able to drag it so that other people can't like talk over. So one second, I'll meet you in chill. If anyone else wants to join the server as well, you're welcome. Hello?
I can hear you.
Can you hear us all right?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Seems to be working fine.
All right, cool, man. Nice to speak to you finally. Nice to see
The
you.
21st century. Here it is.
Absolutely, man. Speaking of the 21st century, I think your critique of communism had more to do with the 20th century than the 21st century. I do appreciate it.
Of course. We live in the shadow of the century that came before. Give me just 1 second. I'm just going to set up my own camera so that I'm filming my own face. I could upload this to my own YouTube channel. We'll just
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go for it, man. Just to make sure everyone on the chat can hear me, everyone like in the current YouTube chat. And could you hear Isel? Let me know. Oh, vegan gays. I meant to give you moderate powers. There you go. You're a moderator. Feel the power. Right. Sorry to the guy that I muted in chill. I'm not sure who it was. Really sorry about that. I just want to make sure that I think I've got a locked. You know what? Actually, I think I've got. Yeah. So 1 second. I'll pull you to there, and then I'll. Sweet.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're rolling.
Yeah. Sweet. I just moved with the different voice chat to make sure we don't get like. Interrupted by anyone just coming in and trolling. I actually went and did a talk at university recently, and I had trolls just come in and just absolutely obliterate me, like actual academic like talk, and that was terrible.
Yep. I assume those are trolls who are paying the tuition to be there, and
unfortunately not. It was like the online audience as well. So it's like. The university probably weren't too happy with us, and like if I'm honest, but you know, like unfortunately, like you know, the internet is what it is, isn't it? You never know what to expect.
So look, I just want to start by saying the kind of most generous thing I can say to the other side here, which is that I completely recognize that a lot of people on the left are trying to make the world a better place, and that they get involved with communism and Marxism, you know, with positive intentions,
which is at least nice, yeah.
Sorry? I was just going to say, you know, very often when I'm dealing with conservatives or right-wingers, I can't say that for them, where it's like, look, what motivated you to get involved in politics? What are you trying to do? Like, it's not universal. I'd also say, I have a background dealing with Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist politics. A lot of those people do not have good intentions. So I can definitely say that when I'm dealing with the far left wing, I am very often dealing with people who have positive intentions and want to make the world a better place. However, I do think that, the legacy of Marxism, for example, is very fundamentally flawed and bad and wrong. And when I talk to younger people, sometimes older people, I'm now 42, but I sometimes talk to people in their 50s and 60s about this stuff, when they ask for advice about reading Marx or getting familiar with that, I don't tell them not to read this stuff or to slam the door on it, but I give them a lot of caution. Like, look, if this is the research you're going to be doing, here are the issues you're going to be encountering. Here's the type of dishonesty and misleading material written into the text. About a year and a half ago, my girlfriend got interested in studying Karl Marx and his legacy. And we did that. It was like a university course. I gave her this whole background on it. We started going through Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital and talking about its place in history. So, my position or my perspective relative to that history is not of a kind of ignorant outsider throwing stones at it. I'm someone who appreciates the good and the bad of it. But now in the year 2020, things being what they are, obviously what I have to say about it is a lot more cautionary than encouraging. So, a lot of things are like that. But again, that first concession I made is not insignificant. Most people who get involved with this, they do have some kind of good intentions, which is worth remembering.
Yeah, and I would probably posit like the opposite side as well. Like to be fair on you, like there is also people who have not only just have bad intentions and are like power hungry, like Stalinist kind of like state communists, looking to like take what they can from others. But then there's also the people who are even like well intentioned, but they are so misled down this kind of vanguard thinking that they dismiss the rationality of others around them and seek to, overthrow this, invisible enemy, this ideological threat that is capitalism, and that like it goes to their heads, and then ultimately they become these like despotic, kind of cruel, evil human beings without even realizing it, because capitalism has tainted everyone else. They've become like so ideologically, embedded within this like sort of like dogmatic view that they become like nasty, horrible human beings without even realizing it. And I do appreciate that. And I think that the horrors of the 20th century have taught us that, like being like, the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. It's like, I have no doubt that in many cases, like, take like Lenin's philosophy, in many ways he was an idealist, hoping for like, this upper stage communist environment, which is very much like Star Trek or something. 1 second. Sorry, someone's telling us. Essentially, he was an idealist in that respect, but ultimately, like the regime that he propagated was cruel and unusual. It was wrong, especially when you see what Stalinism went and did. So, like, I will say, like, I
think there's a really good segue there. So, what I was wanting to ask you, correct me wrong, but I believe you just identify as a socialist. You don't describe yourself as a communist, right? Like you're in kind of intermediate position.
Socialist, anarcho-socialist. Yeah. So like
great. So the question I was going to put to you is about democracy in a pragmatic sense, because I think it puts these other issues into it calibrates all these other issues we're talking about. Now, Lenin is a guy who lost an election. They had elections in 1917 in Russia, and he lost. And he decided to hunt down and murder all of the members of the winning parties and all the members of parliament. Right, so that's what's called the Russian Civil War period. Now, you've just said some positive things about it, and I'm not saying this to insult you. It's quite possible you've never read about that history. That's not the most.
Talking about like the white counter-revolution and so on. Like that Trotsky mobilized the Red Army and.
Right, but very fundamentally, like when you talk about democracy, like I could ask you, well, do you think the people who won the election should have formed the government instead of Lenin? And I'll let you know, the party that won the election, they were called the Socialist Revolutionary Party. So they were far to the left, but they were not as insane as the Bolsheviks. So if they'd have been allowed to rule, they would have had a democratic but very left-wing government in power, probably a government you would have more in common with than you have in common with Lenin or Stalin.
Very possibly.
So
I mean, I don't
this
know
puts
that.
it in a very pragmatic context. Like, what does democracy mean to you, and what does socialism, what does communism mean to you?
I would say that democracy means everything to me. That would be like why I would. Like, do you know Richard Wolff? He's quite a popular figure in like socialism at the minute, and the what he points socialism to be, and again the way that he's like we've learned from our mistakes, and we've learned from the problems of the last century, and what we talk about is the democratization of the workplace as well as the political environment, and that's where I would say that I would lie upon him with anarchism and so on.
Okay, but let's keep this kind of tangible in its simplicity. If you value democracy, as you just said, then morally and politically, you must oppose Lenin.
Absolutely. I think Lenin's repulsive. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Because you gave a relatively positive statement about Lenin before, which I wouldn't do. I wouldn't say anything positive about Lenin.
Oh, well, I think like you've got to like take Lenin like as what Lenin was, and I do think that he's like again, like I say, I do not agree with. I don't even agree with revolutionary politics. I do not see revolution as a way of taking control and power of a state. I say it as repugnant. But what I do is think about Lenin's writing and like Trotsky's writing is like their overall arcing goals and what they wanted was idealistic, and what they wanted to do, what they saw as like impeding, obviously this overall, like what they saw as like the best state for the individual was obviously capitalism, and they were seeking any way in shape or form of seizing power and opposing the capitalist regimes which were causing issues within the 20th century. And I think that, like, don't get me wrong, like I think Lenin was a bad guy, and I just think that his his overall goal in terms of what he was never anywhere near, like he's disgusting pragmatism of how he seized control and exercised power and authority ruthlessly against even his own people. It's repugnant, but his overall arcing like ends of his communism, quote unquote, were actually somewhat decent. They were never going to happen within the way he was approaching politics.
Okay, so I wouldn't agree with any of that, but the type of excuse you're making for Lenin now.
Oh, not excuse. I think he's disgusting.
But look, he is. You're really giving him a lot of positive. But let me just suggest to you, it's a useful, pragmatic, real world comparison. I don't think you would make any of those excuses for the government of Japan from 1910 through to the end of World War II. And those excuses you've just made for Lenin, they're much more true of the government of Japan, to talk about it as an idealistic thing, what Japan was trying to do in that period. And of course, Japan was also much more successful. Japan did not produce the kind of unbelievable dystopia that Leninism produced. And Japan never, as repressive as Japanese fascism was, however you want to describe that regime, the ersatz mix of Japanese Shintoism and emperor worship, and they did have a parliament. They did have some democracy, by the way, in Japan in that period. Limited democracy, you might say, but no, they did. They kept electing the Diet. They kept having newspapers that had the freedom to criticize the government. There were many important features of democracy, you could say, even in the so-called fascist or authoritarian period in Japan. And I wouldn't make these kinds of excuses for Japan in that period either. But I'm pointing out, once you've adopted that excuse-making mentality of saying, and I understand you're being sincere, I appreciate your saying that you sympathize with the ideals and objectives of Lenin, and then you're willing to rationalize this other stuff in that context. Well, it would make way more sense for you to be a Japanese fascist, both in reference to what happened historically, and in reference to what the present day situation is. Right? The present day result of what Lenin did is Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia, and you don't want to live there.
I'm going to disagree right there.
But it's a sincere argument. I mean, you may say that's a bad argument. I know you come out of a kind of textbook university philosophy background, but I mean, this is real life. Like, we have to make decisions. No, I'm sorry, but I mean this in a shallow real life sense of, like, ultimately you have to decide, would you rather live in Russia or Italy or Japan? Like, these are the kinds of shallow decisions that matter. The types of compromises you make, like, are you willing to come on the internet and say something positive about Lenin, or say something positive about Japanese imperialism? Those are, like, they may be shallow, but that's the reality of how we live with politics.
Well, right? I completely agree. I wouldn't say, like, for example, like, it's like I wouldn't defend, like, I'm not defending Lenin's like, when I say, like, when I talk about Lenin's disgusting pragmatism, I mean his actions. I mean that the way that Lenin actually behaved, I think, was actually counter to the ideals that he seemed to profess within his writing. Even like when he talked about, like, the end goal of communism, and a lot of that was stolen obviously from Marx, And like kind of propped up in like this kind of idealistic thinking. But then you've got like, obviously, I was just telling the audience that I'm reading like Terrorism and Communism with Trotsky, and like the reality is that like people don't like to talk about how Trotsky was actually kind of a bad guy, and like, okay, like he did profess like, you know,
why do you put yourself in this conflicted position? So like, I think you would agree, like it's not contentious in our culture in 2020, but it could be. I think you would agree that the Japanese imperial period had both good and bad, right? Now we could digress into naming it off, right? You know, like among other things, it was a period of modernization, and it produced Japan as we have today. And it was Japan being ruled by an elected government that there were elements of democracy and freedom of speech. So we've alluded to some of this, right? Like it wasn't all bad, Japanese imperialism, and that's part of why Japan as it exists today is not all bad. So you could take a conflicted view of that and say, I see both the good and the bad in Japanese imperial history.
But why? I mean, yeah, I do. I would 100%.
With Lenin,
no,
given what you've said for me, so just to
100%.
finish the bill, given what you've said about Lenin and Leninism, why wouldn't your position just be this is bad and wrong and regrettable?
Oh no,
you know,
I would take exactly the same approach to even like forms of fascism and other like politically repugnant regimes. I would never want to mimic them, but I would say like you can, you know, like take for example Nazi Germany, as disgusting as it was, had a welfare state to some degree. I agree with the concept of a welfare state. I just don't agree with the gassing of the Jews. you know what I mean? And like obviously, I'm not cherry picking parts of that state because I would never want to replicate aspects of that state because it was vile, disgusting, and obviously one of the greatest atrocities that have ever faced humanity. And I would never be apologetic towards saying that, and even saying that about the USSR. I do think that the USSR was a disgusting regime in the first place. But then even associating those regimes, like we've got to remember that all of these regimes have been like that we've even discussed so far have been totalitarian. And obviously the type of socialist or communist that you talk to, they may not be totalitarian. So for example, I'm an anarchist. I don't even believe in the kind of democracy that we have. I think the kind of democracy we have is shallow, and it's lip service to real democracy.
You just said you approve of a social welfare state, though. But go on. I'm sorry, but you just said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, I do believe in that. I think, like for example, I think a real democratic anarchical state would actually be more close to what's called minarchism.
So you want anarchy, but with a social welfare state? Okay,
yeah, but then I would say that. Yeah, I know, but I would say that could only happen if you had like an educated population willing to engage in mutual cooperation. And I think that's what real democracy and anarchy would look like. I think the real goal of like socialism, I think like in its truest, most pure form, is almost a massive long shot away from what we even talk about today. It's about an educated population willing to engage within social cooperation for advantage of the everyday individual, and willing to genuinely help their fellow individual out of a state of ethical obligation. And I think that's what I think that most, as you say, like well-meaning, you know, socialists going into it today are actually looking at socialism like that.
Okay, so look, I'm. It's not that I'm disregarding what you said, but I'm replying to something you said a whole 2 minutes ago or something. I think you are correct to raise the issue of cherry picking, but what I'm asking about really is the ethos or the ethic of cherry picking. You can cherry pick, like we can say, hey, during the Japanese imperial period, these are some things they did right. And maybe these are even things we can learn from today, or we could do in Canada, or Scotland, or wherever. Sorry, I know you're not from Scotland, you're from North England. But we could talk about Scotland as an exotic foreign country, both of us. I used to live in Scotland many years ago. Anyway, you know, you can engage in cherry picking, but there are ethical questions involved, right? Now, you know, so you raised the example of Nazi Germany, totally appropriate. I have no complaints. And then the comparison to Lenin and communism and so on. You know, I think, you know, what I'm pointing out to you is, you know, why would you cherry pick Lenin this way? And then what does that say about you ethically? And what is your relationship, you know, I can say on YouTube between you and your audience, but just in general in politics between you and the people you're working with, if that's you're willing to do. So, you know, today, 2020, would you really tell the people of Cambodia that they should go back to communism? Or even in a more cherry-picking specific fashion, would you say to the people of Cambodia, hey, you know, there are bits and pieces of Leninism that are still right and good and that you should go back and pick up? And see, I would not do that. I also would not today in 2020 say to the people of Germany that they can go back and cherry pick Hitler.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
that there are positive aspects.
absolutely.
But to give an example, you may not know this. Hitler was opposed to cigarette smoking, and he was especially opposed to women smoking cigarettes during pregnancy. He had a campaign to eliminate cigarette smoking. So, as absurd as it may sound, you can revive some isolated things of this, but I wouldn't do that. Even if Hitler is correct about smoking during pregnancy, if you go back and read what he said, it's insane racist shit. You can probably imagine it's about the decline of the race through cigarette
smoke
smoking.
too much, smoke too many cigarettes, really, and suddenly you've changed race. Yeah.
Even when he's right, he's wrong.
Yeah.
Like, even when he's right about something, it's morally repugnant. Like I really think there is a point in politics to saying, look, Lenin is a guy who hunted down and murdered the people who won the election. And I am fundamentally someone who's pro-democracy. So I am fundamentally someone who's anti-Leninism. Like, before we even get into Stalinism or Mao Zedong, at this stage, I can say, here are fundamental problems with communism, and even to some extent, fundamental problems with socialism.
I guess this is where we're disagreeing.
I think, but I'm saying this because I think that's part of your own perspective, like that you may not be entirely honest with yourself about. That's a necessary implication of some of your own values.
Don't get me wrong. Like, I think that, like, pretty much everything you've said, I agree with in many ways. You know, I guess the real issue that I have is the conflation between, for example, Lenin's ideals and socialist ideals, or even communist ideals, right? Like Lenin and like
totally reasonable point. That's a very chalkboard point, but it's a reasonable point. Go on.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. So, like, I think, like, for example, Lenin being anti-democracy, that is something that you would not find most socialists talking about today. Most socialists are going to be very much pro-democracy.
They're lying to themselves. But that's my point. Like,
but
that's
how
the
are they
if
lying
you're honest
to
with
themselves?
yourself, you have to reject Lenin for that reason.
But
right?
what about socialism is anti-democracy?
Look, it's a great question. We can return to that, but just to seemingly digress, but to me, it's returning to the root of this. The decision we're making is not about the future of Canada or the future of England, right? The decision you and I are making right now is what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of person am I going to become, right? And I'm telling you, I am not someone who's going to compromise with Leninism or Stalinism. I'm not someone who's going to live my life making excuses for or rationalizing or relativizing what was wrong with communism. And I don't even do that with the Japanese Empire, 1910 to 1945 or something, whatever dates you want to use. Like, I don't even do that, which is a much less kind of horrifyingly one-sided, evil example. So, like, the point I'm raising here, like, yes, we can get into how exactly do you define, what's socialism and what's not? To what extent is Denmark a positive example? But we know, and I know, your whole YouTube channel would be different. Your interactions with the audience would be different. Your career in the future would be different after you finish this PhD. If you start describing yourself as someone who wants the future of England to look more like the present in Denmark, right? That's a totally moderate position. And if you're someone who says openly that you don't support, you don't compromise with Lenin or Stalin, you just that's a completely different position, morally, aesthetically, and even pragmatically. And it's going to lead you into different things, as opposed to sitting around saying that you're an anarchist, but you still see value in the legacy of Lenin and Stalin and so on, right? Like, that's you are making a choice both about the kind of person you actually are and also how you present yourself to other people, how you work with other people. This has implications that frankly are philosophical in nature, given that you're a philosopher.
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. I would say that, like, when we approach life, especially, the main decision that we do have to make is how we are going to live our lives. And I think that the ancient Greeks did a great job of educating us on that point in the first place. Like, most of Western philosophy has been about that, and ethics is like a primary interest of mine. Like, that's what I do. I'm a vegan, like, for that reason, like, like the glorious vegan revolution, and so on. So I do agree that, like,
we're both vegan.
Yeah.
So you can relate to this. It would be convenient for me to have an excuse-making mentality towards leather. Like, oh, well, if it's secondhand leather, or if I bought it before I became vegan, I can still use leather. That would be convenient. That would be expedient. Right? But I don't do that because of this question of who do I want to be, and then also how do I interact with other people. I make the decision, no, I'm not going to compromise that. I'm going to have an uncompromising attitude towards rejecting leather. Like, I think you can see even within your own convictions, there is a reason for you to have an uncompromising attitude towards Leninism.
Oh, but I do. I mean, I was arguing with Tanki.
In that same way, even if it's not practical, like, even if pragmatically it would be convenient to use secondhand leather, or it would be convenient to roll around like fucking Vaush and these other like pro-communist YouTubers.
Vosh is a fucking idiot, man. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I completely agree. Like, I tried calling the guy out myself. Like, the guy, like, he doesn't understand what he's talking about. But like, don't get me wrong. I disagree with tankies all the time. Like the fucking pro-Leninist Trotskyite fucking nonsense that they come out with. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I completely disagree. Like, my main point is that like yes, absolutely. Like, we do have to choose who we are today. We do have to choose like how we are going to live our lives in the most ethical way possible. You know, I think even that, like, you know, Jordan Peterson, like, you know, take responsibility for yourself, tidy up your room kind of mentality. But I think like Slavoj Žižek does a great point in responding to that and just says like, yeah, but what happens when somebody else is messing your room up? You know what I mean? And taking responsibility and like understanding your place within the world is understanding again like how our states should be formed and how we should obviously interact with one another politically. And if we accept that, then we have to understand that, okay, so looking back upon history, what can we expect from certain, like, the implementation of certain states, and also what moral responsibilities should we expect the government, if it exists, to perform? What responsibilities should the citizens have? How should corporations exist in relation to, you know, even like employee-employer relationships? Should we allow them to be propagated onwards forever? And I think that when we start asking these questions, I think that the moral decision that like comes out of this is, honestly, I would say, is a democratization of the workplace, and is a democratization of how we live our lives in terms of like as a workforce. Like the employee-employer relationship, I would say, is an inherently exploitative relationship. The idea of a wage, for example, like the Marxists and early 20th century communists, even the ones that were even anti-Leninist at that time, showed like even women's rights movements at that time were showing that like the concept of a wage, they rejected that. Like when that was being like promoted, they were saying that a wage is wrong. You are renting an individual. You are not paying them for their labor or the product of their labor. And so I would say that like the rejection of these like unjustified kind of economic distributionary methods is the primary goal of like most like many socialists. Not all socialists, obviously. You get your tankies and your Leninists and your people who are full of shit, but like you do have the moralists who are, you know, who are socialists. And I would say, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to cherry pick Lenin and say like there are good parts of Leninism. I don't need to. Like, I don't need to look at Lenin's regimes. I don't need to look at Trotsky's regimes. I don't need to look at, you know, like what went on in like all these horrible regimes in the world and go like, oh well, this was good and that was bad. Like I just meant in a philosophical level, like Lenin's goals weren't.
Well, I think that is a significant decision for you to make, you know, publicly and privately.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which is why I call myself an anarchist.
You to have a more uncompromising attitude in living out your own ethical values. And I'm not really trying to change your ethical values in this conversation. I'm pointing out to you your ethical values are in some political decisions you made, like being fundamentally pro-democracy, making that central to your view of the world. Well, that's incompatible with a lot of this shit
But how is democracy incompatible with like anarchism? Like, so for example, take like the philosophy of like Noam Chomsky and like anarcho-syndicalism. How is democracy incompatible with that?
Good question. I want to reply to something you said about 3 minutes ago.
Okay.
Sorry, we just have it's okay, but we're the kind of several different topics here in several directions, which is good. So sign up the conversation. Well, a couple minutes ago, you were talking about ethical decisions and fundamental commitment to being moral. Okay, and I want to point out, you know, I'm radically open-minded and flexible about that, but there has to be a point, and you have to be honest with yourself about what is the point of making this moral compromise or even doing something you know to be evil. Apologies if you already know this about me, you may not. I signed up to join the army to fight against ISIS. It's only a couple of years ago when that war was very much hot and ongoing. So ISIS, the Islamic State, right? And there are all kinds of immoral elements to that, right? And just to give a really quick one, if you're vegan, in that war, you know, they had a lot of problems with sheep on the road, you know, in Afghanistan and what have you. And you shoot people, but it may sound ridiculous. You also shoot sheep in that war. It happened quite a bit. Now, if you ask me on a chalkboard, you know, like we're in a philosophy classroom in a university, is it moral or immoral to shoot a sheep? You're not even going to eat the sheep. You know what I mean? You're killing an animal just as an obstruction to traffic. You know, oh, sure. In a sense, it's immoral. Am I willing to do it? Yes. With no hesitation. I'm at war. We're trying to win this war. We're going to shoot sheep. We're going to shoot people. Like, there are all kinds of immoral and unethical things I am willing to commit to do. And I am not going to lie to myself, and I'm not going to lie to anyone else. I'm not going to lie to my girlfriend or my wife or my grandkids about what it is I did or why. But yes, I'm willing to make the commitment to do evil and unethical things for a reason. for a reason that I know, right?
Just to clarify, your girlfriend and your wife are the same person, right?
Depends. I mean, if I convert to Mormonism, no, it's just whether, my point is whether it's your girlfriend or your wife or whatever, however, whatever your situation may be. But look, that's one of the temptations: converting to Mormonism or converting to Islam. You get more options.
You're just gonna join ISIS's side now. You just switch inside. Like I'm only joking, obviously.
Look, man, I used to live in France. I used to live in Thailand. There were a lot of alternative lifestyles there. All right, really, that's a kind of standard model for marriage in France, let alone getting into Thai culture. Look, you could commit to embracing what's bad and evil and wrong with socialism as a philosophy, or anarchism as a philosophy, or even communism as a philosophy, if there were a point. But like I'm suggesting to you, in current circumstances in 2020, there actually isn't a point. And in some ways, like, you may be doing yourself a disservice. Like, you may be really limiting positively what you can do with your life by making these compromises. Now, like, right now there's a revolution going on in Thailand. Okay. Yeah, and it may be unsuccessful. I mean, if you were gambling on it, it's pretty likely, it's quite possible it will fizzle out and nothing's really going to change at the end of this attempted revolution.
It was after the kings died and so on, and the unpopular princes like come into power, but obviously the Jura was already in control.
Put it this way, there are fundamental questions about how democratic or not democratic Thailand is going to be in the immediate future. Okay. All kinds of people have to make the compromise. Like, they don't agree with everything in the Revolutionary Party, let's say, but they say, okay, I'm going to make this compromise. I'm going to commit to joining this party to achieve this objective. And then after the revolution is over, we can debate all kinds of other things, right? People do make those commitments. But what I'm saying to you is, making excuses for Lenin, like fraternizing in this way or compromising this way, playing these games with these particular ideologies, it makes no sense in Cambodia in 2020. It makes no sense in Canada in 2020. I think it makes no sense even in England or Scotland in 2020. Like, even on that level of like being willing to embrace something evil for an outcome you're pursuing, I still think this is fundamentally wrong. Like, I really think in 2020, so I really think 2020, just in one sentence, because you just saw that video. I have many videos talking about the history of communism and socialism, hundreds or something. But the one video you just saw, what I'm saying to members of Black Lives Matter, to the BLM movement, and I've made other videos talking about it that are more than 30 minutes long, greater length, is no, in 2020, the correct choice is to actually reject Marxism. Not to like play this game of trying to appropriate from Marxism or wear the cape of being a Marxist. Like, no, like, actually that's the right choice to make. I don't just mean it in a chalkboard sense. I even mean it in this pragmatic sense of being willing to do something evil for something else.
Like, I mean, like, look at the way I see it. It's like, one, like, I wouldn't advocate anyone do anything evil necessarily anyway, because I'm not revolutionary, so I'm not arguing that people do anything that is like cruel and unusual, trying to overthrow the capitalist state, blah blah blah. Like, that, I'm not advocating for that. Like, in terms of like advocating for like a socialist like quote unquote revolution or social change, I would talk about I don't know if you're familiar with it, which is called the Long March Through the Institutions, in which we try and democratize our institutions slowly to move towards a socialist state, and a socialist state as being defined as a state which is based around mutual cooperation for the benefit of the general population, rather than, let's say, the production of profit versus when we talk about capitalism, right? And then, like, so when we talk about like, the moral responsibility of the individual and like what people would be or would not be willing to do, I know that like Black Lives Matter, for example, talking about the abolition of the police force, talking about killing the police, talking about doing some horrible things. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm critical of the movement myself. I'm not actually a fan of like the way it's being led, or like lack of leadership even, or the way or its overall political goals, if it even has any, because it lacks legislative like change. It has its issues, and it's certainly different to necessarily what I would say that they should be advocating for. And I do think that, obviously, as you say, many of the leaders, for example, have been influenced by perhaps some of the tanky kind of Leninist, Stalinist like regimes, and maybe being influenced by this idea of like direct revolution, because like at the end of the day, like people like the whole communist like aesthetic, right? I mean, like the Stalinist, like red revolution, like the Lenin red revolution, like kind of aesthetic that was deliberate propaganda in the first place. Like it's sexy, you know what I mean? That people like the revolutionary like life. It looks sexy, right? I don't want any of that. Like my philosophy is not so sexy, because it's actually about making the world a better place. And like this is the thing.
I know, but that's part of why I've phrased this conversation the way it is that like I feel like your packaging, your wrapping, what you're doing on the surface isn't really consonant with, doesn't make sense for who you are at your core or whatever. Like,
it totally does. It totally does.
This is not me saying I hate you or something. It's saying, look, I think if you really think about it, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe the next few months or something, probably you need to think about rebranding yourself a little bit. Because if this is who you are and what you're about, I see a lot of self-contradictory compromises you're getting yourself involved with that just don't make sense for you. I also don't think they make sense for England or Cambodia or the whole world in general. But for you
take Cambodia, right? Like take Cambodia right now. I mean, Cambodia is an incredibly poor country within the capitalist regime. Like take like Vietnam. I mean, like use Vietnam as an example. Vietnam is, like you said, it was a hybrid between capitalism and communism. I'd probably not say that. I'd say it's like totalitarianism and capitalism. And same with like China. I would say China's fascist. I would say that it's a totalitarian government with a capitalist economy based around like a somewhat half-planned economy around a particular group's interest, and ultimately around this nationalistic goal, like ultimately like fuck the West kind of mentality. And I would say that all of this is also happening in capitalism today. And so even if we take like your mentality, like when we're choosing to be like what we are choosing to be, and if we admit that like we kind of have at this kind of point in time this decision to be a capitalist or a communist, or a capitalist and a socialist, or whatever it may be, like the choice of being a capitalist is just as fundamentally obstructive to justice as the choice of being, let's say, even like a state communist. Because I mean, like, have you ever heard of the Black Book of Capitalism? Like 100 million people are supposed to have died because of like capitalism. And if we talk about like poverty, exploitation, the proxy wars, just like even the war, like for example in Iraq, like the toppling of Saddam Hussein, and then the killing of the civilians there, Afghanistan, the propping up of Saddam Hussein in the first place by the American government, Libya, Syria, like many of these conflicts in the first place have been engineered because of corporate interests, which obviously which is your choice to be a capitalist.
This is what the British call whataboutism. I think the British know that phrase more than Americans.
Yeah.
And you are engaging in a no true Scotsman fallacy in order to justify communism.
Oh, like, no, certainly not.
You may not realize this, but this is what I see, and this is what other people who are moderates or pragmatists, who are neither extreme left nor extreme right, see. What you just said to me now, I know you're accustomed to it, and you've probably said this same thing with minor differences 10, 20 times in your life. What you were doing there, beginning with saying that you don't recognize the current government of China as communist, right? This is a no true Scotsman fallacy. So communism remains unstained by the historical reality of what China was or is, the historical reality of what Vietnam and Cambodia were in the past, or like.
Oh no, certainly
why
not.
Do
like
this?
I will. Look,
why
I
do
will
this
say,
to yourself?
Like, I will say, like, look. I mean, look at Mao. Like Mao is a fucking disgusting person, inspired by Leninist, like Stalinist philosophy, and like I can't help but to like I say that. But like, look,
communism. Like, is this
but
right?
What do you
or is this
define?
wrong?
But this is the whole point. Like, what do you define these regimes as? So, for example, socialism, and like even the combination of socialism and communism, if you're willing to like throw them together, like how would you say, like for example, an anarcho-socialist who argues for the democratization of the workplace, the democratization of the government, the removal of corporate interests and lobbying interests that are corrupting our current democracy, how would you compare them, for example, against something like the Maoist regime in China, which is ultimately like totalitarian and despotical?
I remember there was a letter sent in to Dan Savage. Dan Savage is a sex advice columnist from a guy who said that he considered himself heterosexual. He was married to a woman he wasn't attracted to, and that when he went to the gym, he would receive oral sex from other men, but not have anal sex. And he was writing and saying, "Do you think I'm gay or straight?"
Yeah.
Okay. Now, look, you have blowjobs with men, but not anal sex. How do you want to define gay? To me, this is like a complete bullshit, self-defeating.
Well, it's not. It's,
And,
it will have to be clear on
but
my
let's- this is
definitions,
one
don't
thing.
we? Like, otherwise, what's
My
capitalist?
whole, no,
what's
but look,
communist?
my whole approach to politics, ultimately, this is about motivation and honesty and integrity and what kind of person you want to be. Now, okay, like if a man says that to you, if a man says to you that he has oral sex with other men but doesn't consider himself gay, his motivation is what's important here, not the definition of the word gay. Like in some languages, in some cultures, maybe gay is defined so narrowly that he doesn't get gay.
Then again, I think it's both. I think it's both.
Let me finish. His motivation is self-justification. He's trying to justify himself in his identity, right?
Oh, I completely agree.
Who would have the motivation? Who would have the motivation to claim that Mao Zedong was not a communist? That is just ridiculous. Who would have the motivation to claim that Vietnam today or Cambodia in the 1970s was not communist? Now, I'll tell you who has that motivation. Other communists.
Well, I will say this. Like, look at it like this, right?
Mongolia,
like one of the
communist government of Mongolia was publishing propaganda claiming that China wasn't a legitimate communist country that Mongolia was. That's who does that, right? Like, so I'm just saying, I know you want to point towards this
don't get me wrong.
how exactly do we find communism?
I completely understand.
No,
like,
all of these countries are communist.
Well, I mean, it's like people call
it gay.
But
there's
like,
more than one way to be gay.
But
and there's more than one way to be communist.
Yeah,
and this is communism. And who would claim it's not communism?
But like, look at it like this. Like, would you say that like Norway, Switzerland, like Norway or Scandinavian countries, are they socialist? They get called socialists all the time. Well, would you say they're socialists?
Right, but I think you know the answer to that question.
Yeah, they're absolutely not, are they? They're 100% not. They're like they're capitalists, right? And like
I would say that no. I mean, in many of those countries, for example, you can say they have a socialist university system and a socialist healthcare system.
Well, they have a left. Well, what they have is a liberalist fuck system based around the tax reimbursement of tax redistribution of wealth, based like high tax system, drawing as much money into the government as possible, and then redistributing that money.
But look, I hate to tell you, you don't do economics, but yeah, that's socialism. I mean, by definition, you draw a line in the economy, and some things are socialized and some are not. So in some countries, really quick example, in some countries, the generation of electricity is socialist. You say there are no private companies involved.
I would disagree.
The government directly takes tax. That is textbook definition of what's
no.
socialism.
Like, I mean, if you look in
a country like Denmark is a hybrid economy. The United States also is a hybrid economy, but they draw the line of how much is free market and how much is socialist.
We can get on to the point of like drawing lines as a fundamental point, and like in talks about definition. Like if you're saying like where does capitalism and socialism begin and end, then we've got an issue, and that's kind of the point I was trying to say. Like I would say that if we are like drawing lines, it's like, you know, at like what point is the guy gay? You know what I mean? Am I holding hands with the guy? Is that gay? Is it, you know, like, are traps gay? You know what I mean? Like the age old question.
Right. But the point is, what I'm questioning is not where you draw the line. Like, it's fine. You're asking the question. It's a legitimate question. What I'm asking is, what is your motivation to claim this? If you say you only suck dick a couple times a month, just to clarify to my chat, I am not saying that I suck dick in any way, shape, or form. Extremely erudite, hypothetical, academic conversation here. But if you were to say that you only suck dick a couple times a month and you still think you're straight, what's really important to address is your motivation in making the claim. It's not really the
I do agree with that, but I think that even the motivation, like look at the motivation to reject a certain identity is based upon the conception of that identity and the way it's performed in reality, in relation to what other people think that identity is. So it's existential.
Heterosexual, right? Like you still want to assert you're heterosexual, even though you have gay sex. So that's the significance of it in terms of motivation. But like this is my point. So this brings back who would claim, and you did earlier, and this I think this points to this deep fissure within what you're doing philosophically and politically that you need to, like, I suggest, I'm not saying this to insult you, but I suggest in the next weeks or months you really think about it and try to make this coherent instead of incoherent. Who would say to me or anyone, who would make the claim that Mao Zedong was not communist? or that communist China was. That's ridiculous.
Look, I mean,
Who
like
would
with
say
China
that
right now is
Vietnam
just
or
not
Laos are
communist.
Of course they're communist.
They're
That's just
not
ridiculous.
communist. Like, look at it like this. What are you defining communism as? It's like when you talk about like that guy like sucking dick and then not saying that he's not gay. It's because that sucking dick is gay, right? Like it is a sexual act where two men are participating in sexual acts together. That is overtly homosexual, right? But like when we talk about China, what is overtly communist about China? All that we have is the totalitarian state, which is like, references like Stalin and Lenin. But when we talk about the economic distributionary methods, they're inherently capitalist.
I don't know if you've read one book about the history of China. Yes, China is overtly communist. So I used to work at a university, okay? The university was controlled by a Communist Party secretariat. I have a photograph of myself standing in front of the door, and there's a hammer and sickle logo. The government of China today, even down to the level of particular hospitals and particular universities, like on that small scale of management, it is ruled by a Communist Party. Everyone in that Communist Party studies the philosophy of Marx, Lenin, Mao Zedong, a list of communists. They write exams proving that they've done the reading and understand the philosophy. It is ruled by communists. It is overtly, ostentatiously communist.
Why is there no enforcement of?
If you ask the question, because you did ask the question, what is overtly communist about China? They literally have parades where the army marches and they sing communist songs in unison.
That's
the
great.
government.
But then
doing
it's
that.
like saying,
So
like,
if
look,
you're asking,
Stalinists.
what is overtly communist? I'm saying, what are you, blind?
No, you see,
Like,
I understand why you might say that.
This is way more absurd than the homosexuality.
I understand what you're saying, but like, look at it like this. It's like, for example, Stalinists aren't Leninists, right? We can agree that like there was a distinction between. I'm assuming we can agree that there's a distinction between Stalinism and Leninism in terms of like how the state would have been run, which is why Stalin assassinated Trotsky, right? Like because he didn't want that kind of state,
right.
But yet Stalin would parade Lenin everywhere, and then they had a minister, particularly I can't remember his name, that would use Lenin's like quotes of Lenin to justify whatever like Stalin or the USSR were doing politically, even if Lenin
why are we
actually
even getting into these details?
Because
we know they're both communists. Stalinism is a form of communism. Leninism is a form of communism.
It's not about them being communist. I agree, they're both communism, but the point is that they are not the same. Yet Stalinism used Leninism as an aesthetic to masquerade its actual political endeavors and justify them, just as the way the Chinese, like the Chinese government.
Have I been arguing that Stalinism and Leninism are?
Oh no! I'm just giving a comparative. I'm just giving a comparative example. Like so, for example, right, like. The way that China works today in terms of economics has no economic ties to Marxism. If you look at the way that workers are treated and the way that workers' rights are enforced, or the idea of the dictate of the proletariat, the alienation of the worker is far more severe in China than it is in many other capitalist countries. The whole point is that China does not abide by what would be the economic the economic dictates of Marxism. It doesn't at all. Not at all. Not even a little bit. All it has is a totalitarian state. So like, why would you like? So like, what I'm saying is like with China, I understand why you say like obviously that communist maybe in ideology, right? Just as that guy who is sucking dick is straight in his mind. Like China is straight. They are communists in their minds, but in action they are capitalists. They do not actually reflect any of the actions that would be representative of a Marxist.
Right, but your choice today is if you're pro-communist or anti-communist, if you're going to make excuses for this or engage in cherry picking or not. And this is what I'm saying, because I think I know your answer. So if I ask you today, so given everything you've just said about China, given the current situation China does, do you think China would be better or worse if they had elections, let's say the exact same system of elections that they have right now in Switzerland? So elections and direct democracy, and people can propose amendments to the Constitution and have a referendum. Let's just say they copied and pasted the Swiss Constitution into the Chinese Constitution. If they had democracy instead of communism in that sense, instead of being ruled by a communist dictatorship, a communist dictatorship that, as you have pointed out correctly, rules over an economy that's like 90% capitalist or something. You know, what exactly the percent? Maybe some people would say it's 70%, some people would say it's 95%. Because again, you have to count in things like hospitals and universities. There are parts of the economy in China that are still more communist than anything, in the military and what have you. But in any case, it is a predominantly capitalist society ruled over by communist dictatorship. But you now in 2020, do you think it would be an improvement to replace that communist part of the system with the democratic part of the system?
Oh, absolutely, a democratic part of this democracy.
So
absolutely.
you've got to live that accordingly, bro. Like, that's all I'm saying is you have
Oh,
to
but yeah,
start
fuck
living
Maoism.
back
Like,
to
fuck
someone
the
who is
Chinese government, man.
anti-communist, and because that's all it takes.
But that's not socialism. They don't get to own that, man. It's like that they don't get to own what is like you don't have to be like, if you're a socialist, you don't have to go like, China's a great
But
place.
these are
Like,
real world.
like-
These are real world, palpable examples. Right now, the government of Nepal is communist. Now, right away, I mean, like I said before, there's a difference between oral sex and anal sex, but it's all sex.
But it's
right?
like capitalism.
If
it's like
right
there's a
now,
difference
if we make
between
a comparison,
Switzerland and
just real
there's a
quick,
difference between
if you make a
Scandinavia and
comparison
America.
right now, if you make a comparison between the government of Nepal and the government of Vietnam, just to pick two examples, and say in what ways are these two places communist, it's very different. You're going to come up with a long list of really meaningful differences, right? But still, if I were to ask you the question, do you think the way forward for Nepal in the next 20 years, do you want Nepal to become more like China today? Or do you want Nepal to become more like Switzerland? Your answer, your honest, true answer,
look
is
at what
that you
you
want
look,
Nepal
like,
to be more like Switzerland.
even
And on
if-
some level, you
but,
know
like,
it. You're just
no,
not living
like, but even if you like take that example, like where like the next society is going to develop, like, do I want, like, for example, Nepal to be more like Scandinavia, like Switzerland rather, or China? Well, you've basically propped up, for example, perhaps one of the most moral states in the world versus one of the least moral states in the world. But then if we look at, let's say,
Why don't you
someone,
start, if you
like-
believe that, make that, start living that identity. If
I
you think that
really-
Switzerland is one of the most moral states in the world, that should be who you describe yourself.
Like-
You're not even a socialist anymore. Now you're a Swissist.
That's
What can I
racist.
tell you? You're a Helvetianist. You're a
Like-
Helvetian Republicist. Like, you have to start living that way, man. Go on. But I mean, like, I feel like if you met someone who was in denial about being vegan, if I met someone who doesn't describe themselves as vegan, but they live a vegan diet and they think leather is immoral,
But
I'd
then,
say, look,
okay,
you
but
gotta
like,
start calling yourself
let's
vegan.
like
start
for
living
example,
accordingly.
when you were talking about, like, for example, what I admire from Scandinavia, and you said that they are socialist aspects of the economy. When I'm talking about like the things I admire from Scandinavia, they would be what you describe as those socialist aspects of the economy, right? It's just like when we talk about and if you genuinely believe that that's a form of socialism and it's a mixed hybrid economy, then how can we deny that, like, for example, the World Happiness Reports of these hybrid economies between socialism and capitalism is not like, if socialism is this degradation towards our identities, towards the way that we live in our moral framework, then why are Scandinavia such moral paragons compared to somewhere like the United States, which is by far more right-leaning and more traditionally capitalist? And that's what I would say. It's like, would you want Nepal to be more like, for example, Scandinavia, or would you want it to be more like the United States?
Yeah, right. So just mention, I'm writing a book right now, which makes my political views more clear. And you might enjoy it. At various reasons, various points in this, I thought, gee, this guy might be interested in looking at my book. The book isn't finished yet. I'm doing the final rewrites and revisions and writing the concluding chapter now. So probably within a week or something, I'm going to be finished this book, and I'm sharing it as a PDF on Patreon. But I mean, this conversation is only in small part about me. But I don't know how many of my videos you've seen about socialism. But my perspective on socialism is not that socialism should be abolished. I take the pragmatic view that at all times, some portion of the economy is socialist and some portion is free market or capitalist. And so obviously the percentage of the economy that is socialist in Denmark is much higher than it is in the United States of America. And, with a country like Canada, I think Canada is a very, very poor quality and system of government. Obviously, Switzerland is a more positive example for Canada to look at in many ways. But, I just say, like, so I assume you're in your early 20s now?
Late 20s, 26 now.
Okay.
I'm
close
to death.
I'm 42. I just say, I think it's a hard thing, but like, my perspective on you is not that you're a bad person, is not that you have bad intentions. My perspective on you is that you're someone who's become too accustomed to the chalkboard academic world. And I know you're rebelling against it to some extent too. Like, you were just saying what complete bullshit the university system is.
Oh,
university
yeah,
philosophy.
absolutely.
His point is,
Bullshit.
but like in the real world, these are the kinds of hard pragmatic decisions we have to make. Now, I'm interested in Nepal. It's very unlikely I'm now going to move to Nepal and make Nepal my next Cambodia, but I'm tempted. It's a possibility in my mind. It's because also the language there is very easy to learn. Compared to Cambodian, believe me, you and I could both learn an indigenous Nepalese language in like 3 months. Compared to Chinese, easy language. But look, Nepal is interesting to me politically. It would be so hard for me to move to Nepal and advocate for a more democratic future in a context that is dominated on the one hand by communism and on the other hand by Hindu nationalism that is attached to the monarchy, like pro-monarchist, Hindu casteist. That's a really tough political environment for me to be in, and it would probably entail really difficult pragmatic sacrifices. It might be that the only colleagues I have would be people who are members of the Communist Party. And that would be very disturbing for me to deal with. Like, who am I going to even eat lunch with and talk about politics with? Well, on the one hand, there are these Hindu nationalists, and on the other hand, there are the communists, and there are only a couple fragments of people who aren't signed up with one of these groups to fight over the future of Nepal. That's the real world. That's really tough, right? And it involves those kinds of compromises. I was living in Taiwan, very different kind of, like in Taiwan, they don't have a left to right political spectrum, right? So it's in different countries, in different contexts, these choices. But when you make those questions, the primary questions in your life, not abstract questions of how do you define socialism on a chalkboard, right? But the question is, who am I? What kind of person am I going to become? How am I going to live my life? What is the difference in the real world I can make that I want to make?
I completely agree.
Then I'm going to live accordingly.
Then
I'm going to live accordingly.
And the person that I want to be in life,
a very different life from what you've been doing.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I think the person that I want to be in life, and the person that I would campaign that we should be in life, is a person that supports worker movements, unionization. I would say that I'm a person that would support, the development of workers' rights in the that we see today within the current states that we have. I would be the person that would support the continued democratization of our political systems and a removal of this first past the post mildew. I'm the kind of person that would advocate away from this mindless consumerism that engulfs the capitalist hedonistic mildew that we live in, and move towards an ethical consumerism that exists in something like veganism. Like, these are the kind of real life changes that I would say that individuals can and should make in their lives, and I would attribute most of those changes in relation to the bedrock of equality. And I would argue that the foundations of many socialist movements is this foundation of equality, this idea of rejection of a master-slave relationship between individuals, and the propagation of a cooperation between individuals. Now that's what I would say, and I'd say, like, as a real life
I'm not going to question any of that. I'm not going to question that. On some level, I'm wondering if you've actually spent time with labor union organization, with the reality of that.
I mean,
side
like,
of
for example,
politics.
my granddad was a unionist. He was a unionist, and many. Okay, yeah, there's corruption, and, like, don't get me wrong, there's corruption in labor unions, like in labor movements.
I think if you start getting involved in that, you might very quickly become disillusioned and realize that's a complete waste of your time. But I'm not leaving that aside. I'm not questioning your commitment to labor unions. But given what you've just set out, you set out a series of changes you want to make in the world, differences you want to make in the world. Okay. What I'm saying to you is, you may not realize how much it discredits you and makes you into a joke and a loathsome person when you say things that sound like or actually are excuses for Lenin, excuses for Stalin and Mao Zedong. And you have been living in an academic context where that's kind of glad handled, it's either ignored or encouraged. When you say things like, well, you define socialism in this way, and therefore China and Vietnam don't count as socialist and were never really communist, and they don't discredit the fine ideals that you've attributed to Lenin and so on, dude, you are making yourself into a crackpot. And people aren't going to tell you that. You are discrediting yourself. You are disabling your ability to make a positive difference. And part of the reason is that you then can't have those pragmatic conversations with people who may also want to have a society that's more like Switzerland or more like Denmark, right? And who don't want to have a society like Mao Zedong's dictatorship.
But here's the thing. What do you think communism is in the first place? Because I say you say you don't want to argue about definitions and stuff, but you said what do you think it is? Like, and why is it incompatible with like democracy and like liberty?
I'm asking the question of who do you want to be?
Why are you calling us a crackpot, man?
Who do you want to be and how do you want to live? And you're answering back, how do you define communism? Like, don't you realize what a crutch this has become for you? Don't you realize what an excuse this is?
Wait,
Dude,
what the fuck?
real world. Mao Zedong was communist. There's nothing you can say.
Even if we accept Mao Zedong's communist, he's not the only one, isn't he? Like, so, like, even if we were to go, like, the Chinese government were communist.
Why pull this back to an academic parlor debate on a chalkboard about how exactly you define communism? We're not going to get into a debate about exactly how do you define homosexuality either, right? There's no point. Like, you are disclosing
I think,
motivation.
like for example, like, no, but the whole point, like, so for example, the whole, like, trap's gay kind of, like, debate that was going on in the online communities, this idea, like, this is kind of like, okay, well, if it's a girl and she has a dick, does that make it gay if I have a sexual relation with her? There are, like, obviously, there are nuances within, obviously, even aspects of identity in, like, ideological frameworks, and that's kind of the point. And, like, the whole thing is, like, when we talk about, like, how you define communism, like, so far, like, from what I've got from your argument is that you just define communism as totalitarianism. Where is the economics of the communist regime? Like, tell me what you think economically socialism and communists stand for.
Why, like, in what way is that a relevant answer to the point I'm raising? Because I mean, like, for me, this is about who you are and what moral commerce is going to make. What economic definition of communism would diminish or distract from the fact that you are willing to positively identify with this? You know, like, that's the point here. You know, we can get into what it was like, Lenin was trying to accomplish.
Who do I identify with? I identify with those individuals who existed in Catalonia in the 1930s, who were fighting the fascists and trying to take back control over their lives while being sabotaged by the communists and the capitalists who exist in that period. So, like
totally. Good new direction. Okay, good. So right now you're in your late 20s. Yes. Do you think it's possible that when you are in your late 50s, you'll look back on that and laugh? You'll think, wow, what a stupid, pointless, youthful delusion it was for me to think that I could build my academic career or my political career or change the world by glamorizing this period of 5 years in the history of Catalonia, Spain, and holding that up as an ideal for the future of England. Like, do you think an older person could look at that and kind of sneer? Like, is that imaginable?
Like, I mean, like, well, look, I mean, of course they could, but then you've got, like, people who are elderly, for example, like Noam Chomsky, who's in his 80s.
Right. So Noam Chomsky, did he change the world?
Well, yeah, I would say Noam Chomsky's had an incredible impact on the world in terms of bettering
I completely disagree. I look at Noam Chomsky as a total failure. And Noam Chomsky supported the Khmer Rouge. He supported the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. He published on it. He backed it up for years, decades. I look at Noam Chomsky as a guy who completely discredited himself. His political career is a complete failure. And he had the potential. He had the fame on the basis of his status. He had fame and wealth, being a professor of linguistics who got famous in that field in his own right, even though I think his work on linguistics is also complete horseshit. But, you know, no, Noam Chomsky began from a position of power, privilege, and influence much greater than someone like Bernie Sanders, but he wasn't willing to make the compromises.
But he's also a professor. He's not a politician. Obviously, politicians have a lot greater influence. Although Bernie Sanders, I mean, what the fuck has he done? Like, let's be honest. Like,
right.
You know,
and
like,
that's, I also have videos.
But why has Bernie Sanders not done anything, man? Because the whole political system in the United States is based around, like, you know, what, economic lobbying, which ultimately undermines the democracy.
It's Bernie Sanders' own fault. Here's what, look,
come on, man. But Bernie Sanders has taken...
You know what fucked up Bernie Sanders' life? You know what destroyed Bernie Sanders' whole life? Was that he wouldn't let go of this word socialism. He kept on calling himself a socialist even when it was completely absurd. Like, I think in his early career, he probably was a socialist, but after a certain point, you have to define the term socialist way more broadly than homosexuality to call Bernie Sanders a socialist. But he insisted on hanging his hat on that peg. He insisted on defining himself that way.
Well, he might have
completely undermined. It completely discredited his political career, and that's why he accomplished nothing. Or he accomplished 1/10 of what he could have accomplished. He could have been president of the United States of America.
Well, yeah, okay, so he becomes president of the United States of America, but then has sold out all of the values which would have made him a good president. I mean, let's be honest, that who becomes president of the United States of America? Those people who don't have ethics. Like, that's kind of the point. Like, the whole point of, like, who wins elections is based upon who can generate as much money behind that campaign. You can genuinely predict who will win the election depending on who has the most money. Look at Joe Biden. Joe Biden had more money than Trump, so Joe Biden won. Last election, from what I'm aware, Trump had more money again.
In a big way, man. Look, your commitment ultimately is not to any definition of the word socialist or an economic definition of the word communist or a definition of what happened with the anarchist party in Catalonia for a period of 5 years, during which time they were all heavily armed and in a state of civil war.
Okay, yeah, and we're fighting the fascists, and the communists undermined, obviously, as well. Like, I mean, like the regimes that I reject. I mean, you compare.
I know the history of anarchism.
Okay, that's great. If you know the history, then how can you compare?
I gotta finish this sentence, bro.
Okay,
look, your commitment is not to a definition of socialism. It's not to a definition of anarchism. Your commitment is to you. Okay, ultimately, Bernie Sanders has to be committed to being Bernie Sanders, and you have to be committed to being you. And all this other horseshit, dude, it's really holding you back.
Well, like,
you're
okay,
pinned down by chalkboard definitions.
Even if we
that
agree,
just discredit you.
Even if we agreed that we are ultimately committed to being ourselves, it's like, who do we choose to be? And who we choose to be is representative of values and understanding of how we wish to behave in relation.
What I want to talk to you about. It's
in relation
exactly
to
about
each
who
other.
you choose to be.
Like, and this is the whole point. Like the point of being a socialist in the first place, and any decent, like, it's someone accusing someone like, so for example, of like Richard Wolff or Noam Chomsky or the anarchists in Catalonia of being similar to those individuals. For example, the anarchists were fighting those individuals you are comparing them against. Like not actually like physically fighting them, but economically fighting them, being, you know, undermined by the Communist Party's the control and authority, which were, like, you know, basically bankrupting the worker-owned industries in that place. Like, essentially was done by the communists that you are comparing the anarchists against, these other kind of socialists. And even, like, you know, was it like George Orwell describing Catalonia as like a true heir of socialism is a whole point. It's just like, if that is a true heir of socialism, then what is, you know, the comparative, you know, example? It isn't the same thing, and it cannot be the same thing. It's like saying that like Switzerland or like Scandinavia.
I think you've got to recognize you're speaking out of like the extent to which you've just been locked in academia for so long. This is real academic shit you're saying back to me. If you go around telling people in politics, on YouTube, just in your personal life, if you go around telling people that you are an anarchist in the same sense that Noam Chomsky is an anarchist, that discredits you.
How does this discredit me? In what way?
If you go around telling people that you are a socialist who sees positive things in the ideals of Lenin, although not in his execution, blah, 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 and you don't recognize communist China as communist because you have this idealized definition of communism that you attach to, that discredits you. And it discredits you not just in the eyes of 90% of people or 95% of people, it discredits you in the eyes of 100% of people who really matter. And I completely sympathize that living inside a PhD program,
those people who really matter, I
realize that you can't see that.
Who matter?
I realize you're blind to the extent to which you make yourself a laughingstock by identifying with and making excuses for those ideologies. A Noam Chomsky school of thought anarchist. Who is derided more? Who is more contemptible or laughable in the political spectrum than the tiny coven of Noam Chomsky worshipping left-wing anarchists who want to trade stories about their really great excuses for supporting the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia and supporting Hamas in Israel? That's who those people are.
Oh, okay, supporting Hamas. Let's first look at like the Free Palestine movement. Like, I mean, come on, like you got to admit that the Israel is not treating the people of Palestine in any way fairly.
I don't have to, dude. I'm telling you, I'm a pragmatist.
You're a pragmatist? Are you a pragmatist that would sell out the people of Palestine? I mean, for example, my granddad was in the Palestine police. You know what I mean? So, for example, as a UN peacekeeper in that state, and he faced like, you know, terrorism from what was like, you know, the Jewish Women's Army and like many of the terrorist organizations at that time, you know, facing bombs going off in the Hotel Alexandria, and people like small children being blown up around them, people being killed, you know, around them, and the development of that state.
What do you think you're doing right now? Like, you think you're getting the moral high ground by raising these, like...
No. But the point of the matter is that when we talk about the horrors of Palestine and defending the people of Palestine, we can defend the people and condemn Hamas, can we not?
No, you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be. Like, that's all you get to control.
I
is
completely
your little
agree.
life, right? Like, you don't get to change. Like, that's also, you know, why I support veganism. I'm talking about making the difference you can make in the world. There isn't a goddamn thing you can do about the civil war in Syria. There isn't a goddamn thing you can do about the Palestinian peace process. Not a goddamn thing. You get to decide what kind of person you're gonna be. And that's what I'm saying to you.
When we
You know
talk about
what
like
really
political
matters
pressure,
for
the
you?
ability
I
to
think-
and like, I mean, if we talk about the economics of our systems, man, like the fact that if we can have an influence upon the economics of our system by like modifying the ways in which the workers are involved in corporations, then like we can have a real political influence. I mean, like one of the things I was talking about recently.
You think so?
Like,
Okay,
yeah,
you think
like,
so.
like one of the things.
Claim,
Well, like,
wait a minute. Hold on, college boy. You're making the claim that you, with your PhD in philosophy, are going to be the leader of a trade labor union, and you're going to influence them with your ideals from Noam Chomsky and from Catalonian anarchism. That's your fucking claim in 2020. We can do another interview in 2025 and look back at what you accomplished in those 5 years. You are claiming real world. This is not academic writing on a chalkboard. That you personally are going to become a labor union organizer with your bullshit ideology and your excuses for Leninism and all this other shit.
Where did I make an excuse
have
for
you even thought
Leninism?
through the
Where did
sacrifices
I
you
make
have to
an
make as a person
excuse for
to be in
Leninism?
that position
How
of
many
leadership?
times have I condemned Lenin in this conversation?
Dude, I know, but you did the opposite also. That's what I'm drawing your attention to, that you're making these self-contradictory compromises and waffling. Dude, think about, so I don't know if you've known any of those guys who are real labor union organizers. They have to go through this incredibly boring process of getting a degree in law related to labor union laws. They have to spend years working inside that union. They have to spend their whole life surrounded by the blue-collar schlubs in that union. And then guess what? All they get to fucking advocate for is higher wages and longer vacations and jack shit
Which
else.
is exactly
And then they
why
get
I
to
think
look back-
that it has
they
to
get
be a
look back at the
grassroots
30
movement.
years
Like,
they spent doing that and say, hey, I got people a $2 an hour raise and a slightly longer vacation. That's what they spent their lives accomplishing. And you will never be able to. Those people will hate you and laugh at you and sneer at you, college boy, with your PhD in philosophy and your laughable talk about Noam Chomsky and anarchism.
like the thing is, you say that we'll have to be careful about
if
like
you
making
think-
our
if you
real world
think you're
decisions. Yeah,
discredited in my
yeah,
eyes,
like for example,
think
like
about how discredited you are in the eyes of a pipe fitter. You think those people
What are
are
you talking
impressed with
about?
your ideology?
What are you
This is a
talking about?
joke,
Like,
man.
what are you talking about, man? Like, look at it like this, right? Like, you say that we'll have to make real world decisions about our ethics. Yet you've ended this conversation. You must have insulted me like at least fucking 10 times. Like, we're talking about real world
I can
ethics and
apologize.
shit. Like,
I'm sorry if you feel insulted. I mean, I was trying to give a compelling and engaging performance.
that's
for
fair.
you,
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Like, I understand. Like, things get heated. Like, whatever. Like, I get it, and I understand. Like, you have your position, I have mine, and like these boundaries. And like, maybe like being a bit tongue in cheek is good anyway, because at least you're talking straight. But like the thing is that I would say that, like, don't get me wrong. I understand. Like, having real world impact is perhaps one of the most difficult things ever, right? Like, in general, right? Like, just having like the ability to change the way that things are in the world. But I don't think that means that we should just give up, right? I mean, that's the whole point of fucking veganism, isn't it? Like, the fact that we will campaign, even though things at the minute are at the darkest night they could possibly be, we have to see the stars in the words of Martin Luther King. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, this atrocity that is happening to animals every single fucking day is so fucking atrocious that we would outright do anything to stop it, because it is disgusting. It's so horrific. And it's the same thing with like the way that I'm approaching, like, things like socialism and so on, and the way that the exploitation of the working class, the exploitation of other the indigenous peoples in various countries and so on, like these things are things that I care about, and whether I can do make a massive political shift versus like actually try and make a difference is how I'm approaching my life, and that's the ethic that I'm trying to do performatively within my life. And so when we look at, like, for example,
I'm listening to your justification.
like, for example,
politics.
I was going to say like politics. I was just going to say, like, make a real life political kind of analogy. Like, right now we have Brexit coming up in Britain, right? Like, Britain's leaving the EU, and it's going to make a big difference towards animal agriculture and agricultural laws in terms of animal agricultural subsidies, right? Subsidies are going to change to a paid by results system.
This is off topic.
No.
Brexit is off topic. Come on.
No, the reason it's not off topic is because of this. Like, because it gives vegans an opportunity to attack farm subsidies for the first time, in terms of like educating the population, and also by attempting to change things politically in certain directions in order to minimize farm subsidies, which ultimately prop up, many agricultural businesses. I'm sure you're aware of that as a vegan. Like, it's one of the big things that we're trying to fight against. And suddenly we may have an opportunity to do that. And being an individual who has moral convictions, who has ethical convictions, like, having those convictions is waiting for an opportunity to express what is right in your day-to-day life, even if you cannot do it at that moment. Would you not agree?
What you and I agree about is having a focus on the difference you can actually make in your own life. And it comes out with different phrasings and different wordings, right? But what I'm challenging you with is that I really think that what you're doing and how you're living, philosophically, politically, and every other way, is actually incompatible with that philosophy and with many aspects of the not even the philosophy, but of the pragmatic political conclusions you've come to.
But like, okay, I just want to like, so like
So look, it's fine. You raised this issue of Brexit, but the example we were talking about before, which just based on how you state your own political philosophy and how you justify your own identity, it seemed to be a big deal to you. You were talking about labor union organization. Now, I'm not painting you into a corner. I didn't like corner you and force you to say something about labor union. It seems to me that authentically and sincerely, that's a large part of how you justify your engagement with socialism and a particular school of anarchism and the extent to which you flirt with the far left beyond that. So that's coherent. Like, I understand what you're saying. But if you told me, based on your current situation, getting a PhD in England in philosophy, et cetera, and I'm sorry if you thought I was being insulting, but I'm trying to make you aware of how you would be perceived as a vegan with a PhD in philosophy if you're getting involved with labor union activism. Like, I don't know, and this is your ideology, and you're talking about Noam Chomsky and the fucking Catalonian Civil War. Like, you know, like, that's laughable within labor union activism. Like, it's just, they don't want to fuck with you. They want to deal with professional lawyers who are going to get them a $2 an hour raise and longer vacations. That's what's going on.
But that's like the problem.
I wasn't saying it to insult you. It's to make you aware of what this path is, because it's not even a path you're on. It's a path you're thinking about or fantasizing about that justifies what you're doing. But look, if you said to me in this conversation that the difference you want to make is in the politics of Thailand, given what's currently unfolding, I would say to you, okay, interesting. You know, like, this is a narrow road that you're getting on, but you can get on this. And I would talk to you, okay, you can, starting from your current position, within the next 5 years, you could become, like, I'm being honest with you could become the single most famous English language commentator on and journalist dealing with politics of Thailand in the next 5 years. Totally attainable. And you could become an influential voice both in the East and the West.
Thanks for the heads up. I should definitely get on that. Like,
yeah, no. But I'm being honest. Like, I'm not saying that you're some idiot who can't accomplish anything in life. Like, I really think that's one example of something you could do. Now, but my point is specifically talking about labor union activism within the United Kingdom from the perspective of an anarchist, anarcho-socialist, as you define yourself. I look at that and say, dude, that is a road that is leading nowhere. Now, you mentioned really briefly indigenous peoples' rights and movement. So I don't know if you know this, your audience knows this. I have a playlist, like 100 videos long, talking about my own past involvement with that, specifically the Cree and Ojibwe. Those are indigenous peoples in Canada. Took up a couple years of my life. It's something I care about and I know about. If that was what you were saying to me, I could say, okay, well, yes, that's a difficult road, but it's a road you can get on, and there is actually money involved. You can earn enough money to earn a good living, and you could have this kind of impact, but not that kind of impact. Like, you know, we could talk about, if you were even telling me that what you want to do is devote your life politically to dealing with the drug addiction problem, there are so many possible issues where I could say, yeah, you know what, there's a road ahead there. Oh, okay. And I could even see how your own political philosophy and choices would then fit into that road. And there might be positive, there might be, you know, negative things. Like, there might be some warnings or things. But I'm just saying, it's not some kind of generalized attack on your character or a generalized attack on political activism. You know, what I was saying here was really specifically about your political identity, your political praxis as you presented it to me, given your political philosophy. And dude, you know, life is long. I had a period of my life where I publicly identified as a Buddhist and a scholar of Buddhism, you know, and now I don't. And people treat you differently and people talk to you differently, and you meet and talk to different people because you're going around saying you're a Buddhist. And when you go around saying you're a vegan activist, you know, some people just don't talk to you at all who otherwise would have talked to you. True. And you meet other people. These are choices we make on that human scale. But I think you really, so I assume at some point, either past, present, or future, I assume at some point you've had a debate with a right wing, like a neo-Nazi right winger, someone who's way out on the alt-right. And sometimes they will just ask you questions. They will just ask you questions about the history of the Roman Empire or the history of Judaism. And even if they've just stated it as a question, you know right away what this guy has been reading and who he's been affiliated with politically. You're like, whoa. And I'll just mention really quickly, that even happens within Buddhism. There were neo-Nazis who are Buddhists, believe it or not. And they'll say something right away. They'll say, this is a really obvious example. Some of them are more subtle, but they'll say something about the Buddha having had blonde hair and blue eyes and being a member of a certain race that begins with the letter A. You know, like, but sometimes it's that obvious, sometimes it's more subtle. And you can tell right away, oh, this is where this guy comes from. Like, I'm not saying it in a character assassination way when I say to you, look, you don't realize how much you're discrediting yourself by approaching these issues in this way, as opposed to, and I'm trying to give you a positive example, you know, you can talk about communism in an open-minded and accepting and pragmatic way, but where you're not, you know, presenting a kind of excuse or rationalization, whether it's for Lenin or for Vietnam or for China. And, you know, we're sure there's some awareness of the wiggle room. You know, oral sex is not the same as anal sex. Communism today in Nepal is not the same as communism in Laos or Vietnam. And communism in China today is very different than communism in China in the 1960s.
Like, I think that the thing is, what I would say is that, like,
but you can keep your integrity as someone who's fundamentally pro-democracy. I read you as someone who's fundamentally pro-democracy, but you're not really living that way.
Well, you see, I think I am. Like, I would say that actually fundamentally democracy is, and even like classic liberalist values in terms of like John Locke and Enlightenment values are given their like full fruition, I would argue, in like you know, like the worker owned like democracy that exists within like market socialism, you know, like that's kind of like what I would say. And I would say, like, and talk about like comparison, like, you know, I used to like anal sex versus like oral sex in terms of like, you know, like I would say that we're not even talking about like the same species and the same like kind of reproductive mechanism if we compare something like you know, the anarchists in Catalonia to Chairman Mao, or to like Stalin. Like, they're not even like, they're not on the same board. Unfortunately, the names are similar. Like, but I will say this as well. Like, I do appreciate this. I do appreciate that you're saying, like, people will approach you depending upon the labels you decide to associate yourself with in such a way as to even just reject you out of the fucking the off bat, because they will. Like, I mean, as a vegan, you've got to learn.
I'm not trying to insult you when I say that, but when I say, like, look, outside of academia, like, if you were actually trying to get involved with labor union activism, and this is how you present yourself, and this is how you talk about your ideology, those people will judge you way more harshly than I will. You will be a laughing stock as a college boy. Perhaps
I will. And you know, I may have to take that in my stride, but I think I'm a laughing stock to many people for just being a vegan. But at the end of the day, the use of words cannot be ideologically regulated by those individuals who would take and seize control power in order to propagate their ethics and their morality above another individual's, despite not having been able to give a justification for it. And that's why we call ourselves vegans in the first place, is it not?
Okay, so you just made an interesting statement, and I would say the exact opposite. So you just said the meanings of words can't be used by people in authority to, in brief, oppress us or discriminate.
Oh, no, that's not what I said. I said they can be, but I'm saying that we should not allow. That
would be what I'd say. I would say they can be.
Yeah, I would completely agree. What I'm saying is that the words that the words that are attributable to us, we cannot allow individuals to take control of our language and our ability to identify with our ethics.
Okay, so that's right. So that's where I disagree, because then pragmatically, no, of course you can. If I call people gay, if I say I'm gay, people are going to think I'm gay. It's as simple as that, right? If you say you're a socialist, people are going to start. Of course, that's.
But then, like, look at it like this. It's like when you say, like, for example, you call yourself gay, people think you're gay, right? But like even like in the 1930s, the word gay meant something different, and it's become something different in the first place.
And what communism meant something different in the 1930s too.
Yeah,
agreed. But that's life on Earth. No, I mean, so people can use words to judge you, and you are using words to define yourself.
Oh, yeah, but like,
using words
how words are used is actively how we use words and how we understand words is a performative game in which we operate within other individuals. And so if I'm scared to use certain terminology because of other people's judgment, then we aren't going to be able to have a discourse beyond anything from what a certain group of individuals dictate. Like, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Please tell me what I am and what I'm scared to be, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to be anything that might be worth being. I wouldn't be a vegan right now if I was scared of social social ridicule. Like, but the point of the matter is I would argue that veganism is the moral position. It is the thing that we should be doing, and I'm not scared to call myself vegan because we should be doing it, and I'm trying to actively change that stigma by being willing to identify with it and act accordingly. And do you not agree
Point
with
taken.
that
Point
mentality?
taken. Point taken. But you don't want to call yourself a communist, correct? You understand the danger in that. I mean, I think you
I do, and it's the same thing. If I was a psychopath, I
But
probably
you
wouldn't call
yourself
myself a
Maoist,
psychopath.
correct?
You know what I mean?
Look, would you call yourself a Maoist? No.
No.
Would you call yourself a Stalinist?
I'm not one.
No. So it's the same game. You can pretend you're not playing the game, but you are, and that's why you identify with this weird form of anarchism. Now, look, I just want to say, you made a statement earlier that you think we're not comparing like dogs and cats, or we're not comparing two different types of dogs. We're comparing two completely different species.
Yeah.
When you talk about
Absolutely,
this
yeah.
particular form of anarchism you admire, as opposed to other forms of anarchism, other forms of communism, other forms of
I haven't really seen a form of
Okay, wait. I gotta reply. I gotta speak to that, and this relates directly to what you just said now about how you describe yourself, how you live with your life as a political animal. Okay, I'm going to tell you something right now that the anarchists in Catalonia had in common with Lenin and with Mao Zedong.
What was that?
They had guns and they killed everyone who disagreed with them.
That's not true.
And-
they had guns.
Wait a minute.
But they actually
They didn't
stole
have
those
elections.
guns. They stole those
It
guns.
wasn't based on democracy.
Oh no! Well, to be fair, they never really got to that far. I mean, if we if we look at the time period, they never even had political control over that area. They only had like a certain amount of control.
I know all the excuses. There were a
It's
whole
not an
lot of people on
excuse.
the
It's
internet
not an excuse.
who are going to make excuses.
No. I mean, if you look at the
I'm putting it to
history,
you,
if you look at the history of the
your
people in
position
Catalonia,
now, if your position now is that Switzerland is a good thing, it would be an improvement, right?
well, it'd certainly
It's
be an
not
improvement.
really
It's
compatible
certainly
with the
like
game you're playing.
no, but I think don't get me wrong. I don't think Switzerland's the end goal, do I? Like, I don't think that the end goal of what I don't think any of the states that we see today are like the end goal of what humanity is capable of. I don't know about you, but man, I watch Star Trek, like, and I see something like that, for example, idealistic as it is, as being in reach. I think there's the episode of Star Trek. I don't, I think it's one of the first episodes, right, where Q. I don't know if do you like Star Trek? Do you know Star Trek?
I watched when I was a child,
yeah,
like 11, 12, 13, I
right.
think.
So the next generation, Star Trek: The Next Generation, Patrick Stewart, right, brilliant, absolutely fucking class. Like in that, like Patrick Stewart is presented by this like omnipotent being who's trying to judge humanity for all of its like wrongdoing, right? And he turns around and he says, "What Hamlet said in irony, I say in conviction. What a god is man." Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
the monologue between Patrick Stewart and
Yeah.
Q, the
Yeah.
godlike figure.
Yeah, it's brilliant, brilliant monologue, because I mean it's basically Shakespeare, and basically what he says is that like humanity is capable of becoming something better than it currently is. And there's a quote from Hegel which actually represents that. Man by nature is not what he should be. And that's what I would say that the political environment in which we see is today. It's just a representation
And my response to this is actually more anarchist than yours and more Max Stirner and more nihilist. And my answer to that is, what are you going to do in the next 5 years?
Well, what I'm going to do in the next 5 years is attempt
all this stuff you've got written on the chalkboard, this whole world of academic abstractions, and then there's the question of, what do you actually do in the next video? Okay, I gotta call it a day there. It's been great talking to you. It's our first time speaking. One hell of a conversation, one hell of a podcast. I hope that the people in the audience enjoyed it.
Yeah, same, man. Thanks for coming on.
On the west coast of Canada, as this completely spontaneous, unplanned interaction. Good to hear from you, and I hope you do accomplish a lot in the next.
You too, man. Good luck. Good luck learning. Was it the native language of Nepal? Good luck learning it. I hope it works out for you.
I am studying languages right now, but not Nepalese.
You're a linguist, aren't you?
You've been on YouTube since 2015, right?
Yeah.
So you've been aware of my channel. I'm not saying you watched every video.
I've watched some of your videos. Yeah,
probably.
I've watched some of your videos. Yeah.
Okay, you've probably been aware of my channel for 5 years or maybe even 7 years or something. I just say you've been aware of it not for just a month. I used to ask people every day, asking other vegans, vegan activists, other people. I would ask them, "What are you planning to do in the next 5 years?" And 5 years later, none of them had accomplished anything, and most of those YouTube channels are shut down and gone. Some of them got pregnant and had kids. But let me tell you, if you just step away from the chalkboard and really think about you as one person with 2 hands and 2 feet and about 5 years ahead of you, it gets scary in a different way. It gets dangerous in a different way. And I think you will see these ideological and abstract decisions you're making in a very different way in terms of that.
Yeah, but I will say that when we take these considerations of pragmatism into account, then we have to beware of becoming the Leninist who betrays his ideals for a pragmatic account of what he can do in the here and now. So yeah, I appreciate the conversation, à-bas-le-ciel. All
right, that's a wrap.
Really, really appreciate it. Yeah, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation. Eventful, I would say. I wasn't expecting that tonight. Tell us what you think, guys. Like, comment what you thought about that conversation. I do think that his understanding of communism and socialism was very niche. I think that the way he saw communism and socialism was based on characterizing it by totalitarian regimes and wasn't appreciating the works of later socialists and communists and even alternative socialists and communists that were even around at that time. As I said, that the anarchists were fighting, for example, the communists of the same time period, yet he was characterizing them as one and the same thing. It's like, well, if they're the same thing, well, why are they arguing and fighting so much? You like the talk? I'm glad you like the talk. At least, like, obviously we kind of got his opinion and like his position out. I think, and like, you know, his position overall on like socialism and communism. I think there was times when he was more polite and engaging, and there was times when I think he fell into something a little bit more hot-headed. I think that he did attack me character a couple of times, and that was an issue. But, you know, when I pulled him up on it, he did pull himself back, and he said he was trying to be more performative. Fair enough. I'll take it on my stride. Like, I guess it depends. Like, I guess how you approach these things. Like, I think he does approach things with a very a particular worldview. I almost saw the Buddhism come out in him, like almost Buddhist influence when he was talking about, like, you know, you have two hands. It's like almost like I could almost hear, but you know, the whole thing was it like when Buddha was asked, you know, like when he says, well, what will you do of the suffering in the world? And he says, like, how should we react to seeing all the suffering in the world? Like, you know, when we transcend and we become aware of all the suffering that is going on. And he responds as, you have eyes to see and hands to act. You know, like, I think I'm paraphrasing there, but it seemed like that almost coming out on him at the end. I think that philosophically, in terms of socialism, I don't really think he understood like the socialism that's going on today. I think that he's had a very tainted view of socialism and communism, and maybe to do with upbringing. He did say that he was raised by communists and those around him, so he might have a very particular understanding of it. He said that he'd been to China, for example, and experienced their government and thought that they were socialists. So yeah, like I think that there was issues there in terms of his actual own ignorance. I don't think that he actually understood, to be entirely honest with you, the political ideologies and the nuances between them. That not to be like nasty or anything. He studies linguistics, I think, at university. He's an intelligent guy, but I don't really think he understood the political philosophy. Obviously I try to be nice and polite like through it. I didn't want to aggravate him anymore. He was already like quite hot-headed, we'll call it, but he said it was performative, as he's but like, you know, apparently I'm the one that makes excuses. And in terms of everything, at least he's vegan. He has at least one upside, but then he did say he was going to go and kill sheep and ISIS. That I don't know really how to react to that one. Like the whole, I signed up to the army to go and fight ISIS. I don't think he actually went. And surely he, like, no offense to him, but surely he's past the age of like sign up, man. Like I think I'm on the age of like the latest you can sign up in the United Kingdom's 26. So I don't know how as a 40-year-old, he was like a 30-odd-year-old even, he would have been signing up. So yeah, debates should have a certain amount of mutual respect. I absolutely agree. I do think that he lacked that in many times, but at the same time, I wanted him to expound his position so the audience got a grasp of where he was coming up from in relation to his video, because I think, like, no offense to the guy, he done better than I ever could at illustrating his own ignorance upon these issues. So yeah. Also, I do appreciate the guy in terms of like he is incredibly, like, I think he's educated, and I think he's intelligent, and in many ways he's a decent guy, but we have very big political gulf between us, and sometimes it's difficult to bridge those gaps between people who are so ideologically distant from you and see your the appearance of your identity as offensive. And like the whole thing of when he was saying, like, people will think you're a laughing stock. You know, it's funny because it reminded us of the Lacanian position of, you know, the truth behind the words that you're unaware of, right? That, like, that thing that he's expressing that he himself is unaware of. It's like, well, like, what I got from that in a psychoanalytic position was almost a fear of being a laughing stock, of saying things, like, of a fear of associating his ego with something that would lead him to social ridicule. Whether I'm right or wrong on that position, I'm unsure, but I kind of got that out of what he was saying, and it seemed that his own like, he's in many ways, his fear for me was in actually reflection of his fear of himself, and like what he was actually scared to engage with in the first place. And this idea of being a laughing stock, for example, I wonder if that is a big thing for him. Well, I would like to say, like, Isel, like, obviously I don't think you're a laughing stock. I would like to say that I don't think that there's anything like I would say that I would ridicule about you. You seem like an educated, articulate individual, and from what I'm aware, like, you've learned many languages, for example, and you're a very capable linguist. But your position on politics is wrong, and that doesn't make you a laughingstock. That doesn't even that then it's not something that we should socially ridicule. It's something that we should be able to academically discuss with one another, and not not ideologically discipline one another and punish one another for having these positions, because the fact that you are promoting the social stigma that's preventing social discourse in the first place is exactly the same thing that's happening, for example, in the United States, which is leading to such a social division at this point in time that we could see the possibility of a real-life civil war between the Democrats and the Republicans in terms of, like, person-on-person violence, whether someone walks down the street and wears a MAGA hat and gets beaten up, or whether black people are getting harmed by the, militias and so on. Like, Black Lives Matter protesters, rather, being harmed by, like, militias and so on. Like, these are real-life accounts of that divisionary attitude, that stigmatic attitude that is not being breached within your use of words. And that's what I was trying to point out. Being scared to identify with something that is of ethical consideration is wrong. And what is also wrong is propagating the stigma that makes people scared to identify with what they think is right. And one of the biggest problems within our society is this divisionary attitude in which a conservative and a liberal, or a socialist and a liberal, or a socialist and a conservative can't even talk to each other because of the way they identify themselves. And how many of these people are scared to just even just question their identities because of those who are around them? They are scared of one another. They're like a friendship group that, like, is led by this common fear of one another. I know, like, many people here, have you ever been in a friendship group where, like, there's have you ever been in a friendship group where there's this, like, group mentality where the people aren't really thinking for themselves and they're just going with the flow? That is the kind of mentality that his philosophy would lead us down, a way of societal degradation and ideological despotism that is controlled by whoever controls the norms and conventions of our state. So if what he, like, no offense to the guy, but what he would turn us into is ideological slaves, because we'll be too scared to speak up for what is right. And so, yeah, I would say that, like, we need to really not really follow his philosophy to its logical conclusion, if I'm honest. But he was right in saying that, we do have two hands, and what we do in the next 5 years makes a real life difference. But as I said, we shouldn't, compromise our ideals for with pragmatism. Oh, you're right. You're right, Dean. Nice to see you here. I hope you're enjoying this stream. Oh, hey, Disco Doomer. How are you doing? I've been meaning to have a conversation with you. Uh, do you think that I'd have him on in the future? Yeah, I'd absolutely have him on in the future. You know, I'm not willing. I'm not scared to debate people who have ideological differences. I'm not scared to debate people who will even insult me. Like, that's the role of a good philosopher. You know, you keep you cool even amongst, like, you know, people who are agitating. And that's just what you got to do. And I think that's like kind of the overall goal. And like, you know, I said I'd debate Vosh. If I can debate someone like Eisel, I can debate someone like Vosh. I can debate someone like Ask Yourself, and you know, and people who become frustrated. Like, I can debate anyone, and the whole point is if you can keep your cool, listen to the arguments, hear the reasons behind them. You remember, the angry person, as Aristotle says, is half rational. There is something in what he says. It's just getting through to that half rational part of him. That's the hard thing to do. How can you have objective morality? Morality that exists independent of opinion. In normative ethics, we talk about what people ought to do, but how do you derive an ought from a descriptive facts? Go and check out my video, Objective Ethics Explained. What I would say is that you do not derive it from, for example, a descriptive fact, but actually a prescriptive fact. I would say that the reality is there is an embedded ought within the within your existence, right? Like, if you even think of it like this, like, fundamentally you desire, fundamentally you need to, you have an action urging process that exists as what you are. You are an action urging process. You are a desiring being. And so that is the foundation of this ought. Not a descriptive fact of an essence, which is fundamentally an ad hoc or a post hoc explanation of what you are, rather than an existentialist account of what you are. And so that's what I would really say when it comes down to, like, the foundation of morality. Like, stop trying to found morality on something like a human nature. There is no such thing. So, yeah. I really wish you caught him on the accusation of defending Stalin, Lenin, etc. I don't think acknowledging small specific good things about historical figure is a defense of them. Well, I completely agree. I wasn't defending Vladimir Lenin. I wasn't defending Stalin. I didn't even say something nice about Stalin. I said some very horrible things about Stalin. I really dislike Stalin. Stalin's a horrible guy. I don't even know how he conflated us with, like, someone like Joseph Stalin. I have no idea how he conflated us with someone like that, and it is frustrating. It really is frustrating. Remember, guys. By the way, if you want to support the channel, you can do so by using the donation link at the top of the chat, and or purchasing my philosophy course, so you can learn how to be more politically literate than my opponent. Or as well, you can just leave a tip, whatever's cool for you, if you wish to support the channel or ask a question and have it bumped up to the top of the list. That being said, actually, anyone who has a question that wants to put it in a chat and get it answered, then I'll do my best to do so. Excuse me. The Trotsky text that I'm reading earlier is Terrorism and Communism. And the whole point of, like, I was talking about, like, Trotsky, like, the thing is with Trotsky's a fucking idealist, man. The guy had some really, like, if you read something about upper stage communism, you're going to read upper stage communism and you are going to see Star Trek. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see a society in which scarcity has been entirely eliminated. You're going to see a society in which individuals have complete liberty and freedom to interact with one another, that there is no government and no, like, communist party. There is only worker control and individualistic control of your life. Totally anarchist. And yet, Trotsky, Lenin, their actions did not reflect those ideals. And that's what I was trying to express. I was trying to say, like, the overall goal of upper stage communism, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I want to live in Star Trek, man. Like, who the fuck doesn't want to live in Star Trek, right? You watch, like, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and you tell me that you wouldn't... I would be trapped in the Delta Quadrant for the rest of my life on that damn ship if I could be. Like, it is much better. I had the same problem with trying to understand Trump supporters' logic. Well, you get it with every political ideology. You get this like dogmatism, unfortunately, where you get these people who just have an idea in their head and they just want to tell you their idea, and you've just got to sit back and go like, oh yeah, you're either agreeing with them or you're wrong. You know, you're either with them or you're against them. And this is like the divisionary attitude that he's propagating. And it's something that you see within like, you know, like Trump supporters, but even in, you know, even the opposite side in the United States, which is why you have this like just bashing of heads with it. It's like, you know, like, you know, it's like funny. Have you ever seen that dinosaur? You know, it's like got like it's like basically, it's got that like really thick skull, and it looks like it's meant to ram. And it's like small, it's meant to ram. It's in Jurassic Park and stuff. Well, what we found out recently is actually those skulls must have been for display, because if they were to ram each other, both skulls would fracture. That's about how I think of American politics. It's all for display, but as soon as they hit each other with each other's counter arguments, both sides are shown to be as full of shit as you could possibly be. It's like the only thing they have in common is how wrong they actually are. What did you think about his point on talking to labourers about Catalonia and Noam Chomsky, that you would be the only way, that would be your only way of reaching labourers? Well, I think his point about Noam Chomsky, like talking like it's like one, like I'm not gonna be like, oh, by the way, guys, did you know that I'm an anarcho-syndicalist? Can I go and tell you my Instagram bio? Like, let's go and talk about like what I am. Haha. Like, no, like I'm gonna engage with them on like real life points. Like, philosophy is not about who I am and what I like how I'm behaving. Like, oh, what am I? You know, what's my political stance? It's instead like, oh, let's discuss a way in which we can make our lives better. If I'm talking to like, you know, someone like a Trump supporter, or I'm talking to like a labor unionist or someone like that, and we're discussing a political problem, I'm not going to engage with them by telling them like, oh, by the way, do you know who I am? Like, my ego's not that fragile. Like, I don't need to tell you who I am. Like, it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with us and how we are going to live our lives. And it's funny, for someone who is professing that, he kind of just lost that totally at one point and just started, rather than saying like how we are going to live our lives, just started talking about like, who are you and how do you identify yourself? What label do you give you? What like give me your Instagram bio so that I can judge you as harshly as possible. Like, and this is kind of the issue. Like, you know, like when I'm talking to a Trump supporter, I don't need to go, I'm a socialist. I just need to go like, so for example, like they're talking about how they don't want Medicare. You know, Medicare for all, or like, you know, like the policies of like a single payer taxpayer system. And I say like, why don't you want that? Like, engage them with reasons and engage their ideology for what it is. Like, I don't need to go like, he has my ideology and fight you. Let's talk about yours and the logical conclusions of it. Like, you know what I mean? And like, it's just like I think that the one of the biggest problems of society is this sort of narcissistic, egotistical like egotism that like perpetuates like our like actions today. Like, how many individuals just go around trying to profess what they are, and this existential like crisis that they're in, like, please let me tell you who I am, like, you know. And it's like, fucking calm down, man. Like, everything's okay. You're actually none of that shit. You're a human being living your life trying to do what you think is right. The only value of these descriptive labels is maybe just to communicate like, oh, I'm a socialist, so I believe in like, you know, the economic liberation of the working class. Like, I don't need to go like, oh yeah, but I actually agree with everything Karl Marx has ever said. I just got a cup of tea there. That's really great. I haven't seen that vegan lawyer's conservative vegan vids. She'd be a good debate opponent. Ooh, there's a vegan lawyer. If I can think of a true opponent for a philosopher, it is the modern descendant of sophism. It's the lawyer. I remember getting told by one of my philosophy professors, I think it was like second year university. They were like, you should have an innate contempt for politicians, right? It's exactly the same with lawyers. My God, those blood-sucking vampires. Like, I'm only joking. Like, I want to learn law. To be entirely honest with you, to be effective within the world today, and I think the law is actually a brilliant thing. I actually think laws are incredibly useful, and I'm very glad we have them. I think any state in which you realize that actually, if we didn't have the law to, chastise, for example, those people who commit evil wrongs within society, would be very much worse off without it. But at the same time, lawyers, man, it's like word games. Where's the truth? Where's the spirit of the law? The justice from which the law is founded upon. I can tell you, it's not in their bank accounts. Have you had to deal with the NHS before? Do you have any health conditions? I've had to deal with the NHS many times in relation to my health conditions, my family's health conditions, my girlfriend's health conditions. Like many have had issues. Like obviously, I think most British people have had to have dealings with the NHS, right? Like, and honestly, it has its problems. It has real problems, right? Bureaucracy being like the biggest one. And it gets worse and worse as it's becoming more like privatized, right? Like it's actually getting far fucking worse. Like one of the things was like when me grandmother was sick, we're talking, like me mum was trying to sort out the oxygen deliveries and stuff for me grandmother, trying to sort it out, and she was like, well, wait a minute, why is the system like this now? Like it used to be like, like combined, and then like why have they done this? But it's because they privatized part of the system, and because of that, like they undermined like the ease for the individual in terms of like, supplying something as essential as oxygen. And these are the issues that we're facing today, the privatization of beds, for example, by the Tory government. But it was started by the Labour government of like Tony Blair, like, that liberalist, fucking capitalist, like filth that Tony Blair was. My God, I may burn in hell. But the point is like as corporatized, the more corporatized National Health Service becomes, the less efficient it is at delivering what is essential healthcare towards individuals. And like a combined system, a single unified system works more effectively in delivering. It's like think of the military. Can you think of a more effective logistical organization than the military? Now imagine you privatized the different aspects of the military, and now try to get them to communicate and agree upon like how they will behave with one another. It's going to slow the operations of the military down. But we wouldn't want that because the military is essential for defense. So we don't privatize the military. But if we're not willing to privatize the military, why are we willing to privatize healthcare and make it less efficient? Well, it's because the people who are privatizing healthcare don't give a shit about the general population. But they do give a shit about being invaded. So, and having an effective military organization. The only things that we privatize in the military are those things like weapons, and weapon development. We privatize profits. We don't privatize costs. Oh, thank you for your donation, Wicked Fatigue.
Wicked Fatigue donated £5. Have you ever used any Linux distros? They are an alternative to Mac OS and Windows. Except corporations and the government have more difficulty spying and monetizing your personal information.
Thank you for your donation, Wicked Fatigue. I really appreciate it. I've never used Linux and stuff like that. Honestly, I wouldn't know where to start more than anything. Like, and how would I download my games, man? Like, would I even be able to download the apps? Like, I know that like Linux isn't compatible with like loads of stuff. Like, you can make it compatible and stuff, but like I have no idea what I'm doing. But yeah, I appreciate the advice though. I guess the government probably. I'm on probably a few watch lists by now. I was joking to my girlfriend. We're gonna knock at the door. I just started reading Trotsky, and I was like, it must be the CIA. It's got to be like I click play, and then I got a knock at the door. I was like, shit, here. But yeah, like we talked about the NHS before. Like the NHS is a beautiful organisation in its entirety. I think, like, if they look at the Clement Attlee government of 1945 to 1950, it was probably one of the best organisations, like organised governments that we've ever seen. And ultimately, as we're saying, like made, in the words of à-bas-le-ciel, more socialist our system, and yet had a massive impact upon her in terms of benefiting society, which while right-wing governments have, and apparently even while Labour governments and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown have done a great deal of undermining the achievements of those greats who come before us. And our grandparents, for example, who fought like, tooth and nail to make this country a better place, are getting undermined by those, ironically, unpatriotic individuals. I mean, like, if I could think of a less patriotic thing to do than undermine the well-being of the general population, yet they hide behind this false religion of patriotism, propping themselves up as if they are more British and, more fundamentally, in line with traditional British values, yet undermine the ethics and the morality of the generations that built the nation. Like, and it's like the only thing more British about you is the fact that you drink more, like you have high tea with the fucking Queen. That is the. Can I debate Ben Shapiro on socialism versus capitalism? I would love to debate Ben Shapiro. If anyone wants to reach out to Ben Shapiro and if he would be willing to debate us, absolutely. Like, I'd debate Ben Shapiro. I mean, the fact, like, Ben Shapiro, like, me and him at least agree on the fact that, like, people talk about, like, the liberal economies of Scandinavia as if they're socialist. They're not socialists, man. They're not socialists. But at the same time, he's full of shit. What do you think political path would have a better result leading out of the pandemic economically and healthcare wise? That's actually a really great question. So, political path for the economy especially. Like, I would say that the first, I'd say what we need to implement is probably I think that what would have prevented much of the damage to the economy in the first place would have been like UBI, like, universal basic income, would have done a great deal at preventing an economic recession. And basically that's what we had to do, but we did it the wrong way around. Like, we started paying people's like workplaces to try and prop up institutions rather than paying the individuals themselves as the consumer to invest in organizations. And so we're basically playing it at the hands of like the contemporary like organizations to try and like prop up certain like sectors in order to maintain like social roles and shit like that. So I would say like the implementation of something like a basic income for individuals would be economically beneficial. It'll prevent a recession by having an influx of cash. It's somewhat Keynesian economics, right? I don't agree with much of Keynesian economics, but it's Keynesian economics. We have an influx of cash at the bottom and it will trickle its way to the top because, let's be honest, we all know money moves upwards, right? Like, corporations will take every penny they can from, and so money moves upwards. If we put it in at the bottom, the money will move upwards and clear the debt that is generated by this, obviously this societal kind of issue that we're faced with, people being like laid off and so on. And it also gets people away from, like poor life decisions and stuff, which can cost the country a lot more money. I mean, like, if you look at like the depression, the suicide rates, like things like that are skyrocketing upwards because the economic inequality that is being perpetuated. Amazon's making billions, but the average everyday individual is actually losing money, and even the people who are working in these Amazon warehouses are being exploited to shit. And so that's the first thing I would say. The first thing that we need to do is probably implement a system which is going to give individuals the necessities of life so that the economy functions normally in terms of consumerism, in terms of that people are able to get the GDP moving, because it's going to stagnate, because people's money is going to drop, and because they're not having enough money, they are going to, and because firms are collapsing, and then people aren't going to get paid through this furlough scheme, quote unquote, we are going to see a drop in the movement of GDP, and it's going to look like an economic recession, when in reality it's just because the money's not going into the right hands, it's going into the firms and not the individuals. So the first thing I would say is, like, we need to find a way to pay the average adult some money, right? We just need to just give them money. And people might think, wow, where's this money going to come from? I can fucking tell you where it's going to come from. It's going to come from fucking Amazon. That's where it's going to fucking come from. They've made billions. And, like, like Jeff Bezos being the world's first trillionaire. Like, yeah, no. No. Like, I would say that we need to, look, they're totally dependent upon, like, these people, like Amazon, it gets taxed like zero. Like, I mean, literally $0, like £0. Like nothing, yet is totally dependent upon the infrastructure of our nations for its functioning. It uses the roads, it uses the workforce, it uses so much of our infrastructure, yet pays nothing towards it. That has to end. We do not give, like, it's not like they can pull out of the market. Their profits are entirely dependent upon the market that they've cornered. Like, let them pull out. We will replace them with someone else. Let's see how they act then. I tell you, they will take the taxation. Okay? They will take the 10% even tax. 10% of Amazon's profits could pay a considerable way with the goals of the nation, right? And this is what I would say: tax Google, tax Amazon, tax Starbucks, tax the firms. Typically the firms that are profiting from the growth in e-commerce. Relating to the individuals being locked inside the houses, and give it back to the individual so that they can reinvest it in the economy, and we will see growth in the sectors that are being crushed by these corporate interests, these like leviathans that are like, controlling and monetizing like the economy in their own interests, and we will see a movement back towards a consumerist. We will see a movement towards the way that the consumer wants to direct the economy. And that's supposed to be the whole point of capitalism in the first place. We just need to make sure that it works properly. And I mean, like, what I'm saying really here isn't even a socialist concept, right? This is probably more liberalism more than anything. And I mean, the words of someone like Adam Smith comes to mind, the idea of these vile maxims of the masters of mankind. We need to stop conglomerization and corporate monopolies from taking control of the market, because they will crush not only other industries but the workers beneath them, and you'll be surprised at how many people will be left suffering in their wake. So yeah, that's basically what I would say that we need to do as like priority coming out of the pandemic. I would say also we need to think about where we're going to invest in terms of society and what we should be gearing towards. I would say that the pandemic has taught us the fragility of this current economy, and we need to move to something which is more robust in terms of even what we are doing. And I think that having a workforce that is more anarchized and more capable of being self-employed in relation to e-commerce, having more people who are employed online, even as people like coders and stuff like that, would benefit, I think, the country towards the future and towards this growth towards e-commerce. Because no matter what way we want to like kind of spin things, the high street is going to suffer, right? Look, it is a dated system, and it's relying upon, let's say, like high rent. When like Amazon's just got to rent a warehouse, it doesn't have to rent a storefront on a high street, which is costing 20, 30, 40,000 pounds a year to rent. These high streets are going to die because they are going to be outcompeted. Okay, that's what capitalism is going to do to them. And if we don't see like the rising tide of e-commerce and gear our population to taking advantage of that and not allowing it to be totally conglomerized and corporate and monopolized by like certain select individuals, then we will have a means of making sure that our economy is more robust in light of like future economic uncertainty. So that's basically what I would say. But thanks for your question. Oh, I couldn't read is turning into a neoliberal nightmare more by the day. Swede. I don't know what's going on in politically in Sweden, to be entirely honest with you. Basic stuff I do, but not like, the grand, like I don't know the nuance. Like I'm not Swedish, for example. I'm not keeping up to date. I can't even speak your language, so I don't even know what's going on in terms of like your own media. If you're an idealist, how do you explain the fact that damaging certain parts of the brain affects your mind? So I'm an idealist because of the conceptualization, the apperception of reality is based upon, our engagement within it. Like the fact that that mind allows us to understand like objects of our experience. That does not mean that I disagree with the idea of like material science. I actually very much agree with material science. I do believe in matter. I do believe in physics. I do believe in chemistry, biology, and the natural laws which govern this physical realm which we coexist within. It's just that entire physical realm, that entire scientific paradigm from which we exist and understand the world as, is the production of mind, and so cannot explain something prior to mind as being like fundamentally causing mind. It's epistemologically impossible and metaphysically impossible. It's to separate what I would call the difference between the that which like understanding, like for example, that our consciousness is produced and connected by our physical form is fine. It's just the difference between saying that it's caused by our physical form and we have that is produced by a physical form and that's why we have consciousness, and the separation between that and saying that every thought, action and behavior that we have is the result of a prior cause relating to material physics, which I would reject and say was metaphysically impossible to actually formulate an argument for. That would be the difference. I hope that answers your question. I use Windows. I could use Mac if I could play games on Mac, but Windows is the second best in terms of security. Well, I like me Windows is that's what I'm used to. I'm not gonna lie. I go anywhere near Laura's Mac stuff, and it's like, oh, what the hell's going on here? And it just feels dirty. It just feels wrong. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm just stuck in my ways. That's what it is. I mean, I would use it. Don't get me wrong. Like if my laptop broke and someone was like, "Oh yeah, take this like sick MacBook that's worth like £2,000," I would be like, "No, I'm gonna go get like a £100 shitty laptop that's secondhand and probably gonna break in 5 minutes." Like, of course I wouldn't do that. Like, but at the same time, if someone offered me like an equally as good Windows computer versus a Mac, well, one, it would probably cost 1/5 of the price because of the way like the inflated costs of like Mac, but then ultimately I would say as well, like I just prefer Windows. I'm just so used to it. Again, if anyone wants to have their question elevated to the top of the list, or they want to support the channel, then please hit the donation link and ask away. You get £5 for text to speech and one like anything I think above £1 for a question. So yeah, I also have a course coming out. Go buy it. I've heard that like the only problem with like Mac and stuff like that is also like if you're like a coder or something, like it's ultimately like harder to like kind of get into, like especially like I know that like Apple OS isn't as good for like app developers and stuff as Android or something. Like one of my friends was doing something with this sort of stuff. I have no idea because I do philosophy and that's pretty much exclusively I do philosophy. And and that is it. That is it. That is my life. That's yeah. That's But at least I know what communism and socialism actually is, guys. So, you know. If you got a question, drop it into the chat. I think I'm actually looking at the wrong chat. I just realised I've actually had. What's that say? Where the hell did that go? How does one keep their cool during an online debate compared to debates in uni? I would say it's just a choice, man. Like you can get mad, or you can understand that there's no sense in getting mad. I mean, don't get me wrong, I get baited. Like I get mad sometimes. Everyone gets mad. Like, for example, the race realists that came into the last stream and they were arguing, like for like, not like have like immigrants in the country because they think that it's bad to mix races and stuff, like that kind of like disgusting racial bigotry that they were like perpetuating in that stream. They're like just racists. Yeah, like the triggerers, man. Like, I'm not gonna get not triggered by a racist. It's foul. It's disgusting. I think anyone in their right minds would see that someone who is so bigoted and prejudicial as being bad, and not want to engage with them. But at the same time, I commend those individuals who can. Like, you can't change hearts and minds even of those people with the perhaps the most disgusting and foul ideological principles without being, sincere towards them and engage their points like rationally. And it's just focusing on rationality that is key. I would say that like university kind of taught me that. I would say that I've always been quite a patient person anyway. Well, not always, but I've been quite a patient person for many years. And university encouraged sincerity and honest engagement with ideas and with other individuals despite one's own position. It was like the hallmark of a philosopher, is what I was taught, was to be like that. And the issue with online philosophy is that many individuals just don't have that training. Not that it necessarily prevents them from like obtaining that position, like they can do it, but they've already went into it with maybe the wrong intentions, and they've had bad experiences, and they think that philosophical discourse is supposed to be something more akin to one-upmanship and trying to overcome the other individual in some sort of intellectual dick measuring contest. And it's an issue. Like, it can be an issue. Like, I mean, like, I've debated many people who've they just want to get this one-upmanship. Like, they just want to tell you like you're wrong, they're right, and like you're stupid for believing what you've believed in. You know what I mean? And it's just like, unfortunately, like, dealing with those people can be like, it almost masochistic. You know what I mean? It's like you're driving a nail through your own head. But at the same time, without dealing with those people, how else are you going to make, change hearts and minds of the followers, of people who are sincere towards those positions and are just misguided? So yeah, I'd say like it's just a choice. But yeah. Who there's that vegan lawyer that said reveres Malcolm X and Black Lives Matter. Well, I think Malcolm X politically was a disaster for the civil rights movement, and I think that I would argue that it was the work of people like Martin Luther King who made real change, a real change possible. He understood they understood like ideological power and the differences between individuals far better than someone like Malcolm X, who was just a political idiot, if I'm honest. He's a political idiot because of his desire for direct action and revolution. He misunderstood the fact that you cannot force moral progress. What Martin Luther King did was bring to light the horror, the atrocity, the wrongdoing of those individuals who are persecuting black Americans, and like showed it to the entire world. Like that was his whole goal. And by doing so, he disciplined them. He changed their minds. He actually made them better people, which is why you had generations of people who went from being racist, bigoted, horrible, cruel people to being sympathetic to the plight of the black American. That wasn't because of the Black Panthers and the desire for direct conflict, because that is only going to mobilize resistance and ultimately undermine freedom. As you say that, like Rosa Parks. Martin Luther King actually made Rosa Parks what she was. He was actually incredibly. He had a great deal of insight with what he did with Rosa Parks. He got told, like, there's this woman who's, she refused to, give up a seat on the bus. And, that's like not the only time that happened, right? But what he saw is with Rosa Parks is an opportunity. Here is a woman, right? In particular, being a woman is important, right? Because it's not like a man, like, fighting someone. She just didn't give up a seat on the bus. It was passive resistance, right? And it was the foundation of the Occupy movement as a whole, right? This passive resistance, this resistance towards authority that then forced them to take direct action against her, and showed their aggression and cruelty, the malice and malevolence within them. And so what he did is he brought in the media and showed this wrongdoing, this atrocity. He said, look at what they are doing to this poor woman, right? And that was the genius of Martin Luther King, and obviously the conviction and what I would admire Rosa Parks for, this having moral conviction. And Martin Luther King he understood the power of what she was doing and what she stood for, and he extrapolated it outwards and onwards. But Martin Luther King didn't want to be a leader, man. He wasn't propping himself up like as this ego figure. I want to take control. It was like thrust upon him, and I think that makes a hell of a difference as well. I'm going to buy some of your book recommendations. I have a negative bias towards continental philosophy, but I'm trying to be open-minded. What are your views on analytic philosophy? I think analytical philosophy, for me, if I'm honest, is just dry. But I'm used to continental philosophy. I think there are very many intelligent analytic philosophers. I think sometimes the distinction is maybe not like fair, because you get like the combinations of like of people who are, in one tradition and not the other, in terms of writing styles and everything, and the way that they're approaching the world. So it's maybe not fair to like just make that like cut. But at the same time, I would definitely lean towards continental philosophy, primarily because we put towards like if I was to separate the fields, is we construct a whole worldview rather than a particular position, like a particular nuanced position. We construct a worldview, so it has to be like logically coherent in relation to how we approach life. We don't construct ethics as being separate to politics. We don't construct metaphysics as being separate to ethics. We construct it as being one holistic worldview, which normally means that the books that we write and read have to be like this thick and unbelievably complex in that respect, but I think teach you more about your humanity than analytic philosophy. And I think analytic philosophy as well, it rejected some of the greatest in its foundations. This is and not so much in later years, as I say. The distinction may be like a bit unfair to characterize analytic philosophers like this, but it rejected in its foundations a lot of the prior philosophers as not being philosophers, and basically tried to start philosophy again. That's basically what analytic philosophy did in many ways. It rejected the logic and reasoning of other philosophers because of their style, rather than the substance that lay within it. They didn't take the time to be sincere to the ideas of the other, and they try and construct this language of logic where you can analyze an individual's argument as easily as possible without realizing that actually all they've done is created a different style which you must learn and be sincere towards anyway. Which is why they end up arguing over like how we use the word or the word and. and not really considering, the substance that lies within, like, the essence of the argument. And I would say that's one of the drawbacks again of analytic philosophy, and that's why I'm much more of a continental myself, like in terms of what I enjoy reading. Even like I can't take something that's so dry. It's like if I wanted to do science, man, and I'd do science. I wouldn't read something that reads like science, but isn't. It's not for me. It's not for me. But at the same time, I do read some analytic philosophers, like, because they make good arguments, man. Like, there's some of them that make some really good arguments. You can't not read them. Like, it's the same with continentals. And I think that the unfortunate reality is that, like, getting people to read both sides when it's the good, like, the good arguments is a bit shit. It's hard to do. Yeah, it's just crap. What am I gonna have for dinner? I have no idea. For Christmas dinner, I have no idea. I'm thinking about making like some sort of like vegan meat, and I want to make like this vegan cheese. I was gonna try and make like a caramelized onion vegan cheese. I've got like an idea of like making this like cheese, and I'll release the recipe if it works. Like, so yeah. Have you read Walter Benjamin's Critique of Violence? His concept of divine violence also kind of reminds me of Levinas's alterity concept. I haven't, I'm afraid. I'll definitely give it a look. Am I going to read Eisel's book? I might, yeah. Why the hell not? I mean, like, I was going to read Sam Harris and critique him first, really. And I think I kind of got to. I also want to read, I'm talking about pop figures here. Like, this isn't for me PhD, guys. So, I'm not reading Sam Harris for me PhD. I'm certainly not reading Eisel for me PhD. No offense, Eisel. But I was going to say, like, I was also planning on reading Matthew McConaughey. He's just released a political statement about how he sees politics from a point of a marketeer, and I will appreciate Matthew McConaughey's position. Matthew McConaughey, he's got that southern charm about him as well, and he's talking to Russell Brand and stuff, and he's like, and he's like this cowboy and all that, and I'm pretty sure on cocaine. Like, almost positive that man was coked off his face during that conversation, because no human being behaves like that otherwise. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's just a bit of a crazy guy. But whatever. His points were actually, although at first I was like, what the hell's the guy talking about? His points actually were, like, pretty decent. Like, he was basically saying, like, talking about, like, a market as perspective in terms of, like, the way the left, for example, were approaching politics. He was saying, like, for example, he's saying, like, the people that were saying, like, campaigning that more people should vote. He was like, great. Who could reject it? What a great campaign. More people should vote. But then he would say, the left would say, so that we can get that bastard Trump out of office. And he's like, well, what the fuck? You've just lost half of your demographic. You've just cut it in half. And he's absolutely right. Like, the way that we approach conversations and the way that we approach each other politically is of vital importance towards creating real political change. And, like, as a marketer, like, he understands that, like, the way in which, like, I mean, shit, like, getting people to watch a YouTube video depends on how your thumbnail looks, right? Like, it's the same thing as, like, having a political conversation. The way that they're going to deal with you politically is going to be made off a snap judgment of, like, 9 seconds of, like, a visual or, like, some sort of auditory explanation of your position. And if they don't like it, if it just ultimately repulses them, they're out. And then you're not even, like, as he says, on the same road anymore. Like, you're no longer even, like, on opposite sides. You're no longer even talking about the same stuff. And I cannot think of a better country from which that is more relevant than the United States. Like, people just aren't really engaging with one another. So I wanted to read that first and, like, kind of review that, because I think that he's probably making some really great points. I don't agree with his political stance. From what I'm aware, he's like a liberal, center road kind of thing. But, like, his points on marketing, and approaching politics as a marketer, it's insightful, because I mean, like, the guy is incredibly successful in Hollywood. I mean, what an aesthetic place. What a place where you've got to, compete with other individuals aesthetically. You've got to portray yourself a certain way. You've got to act a certain way to get certain roles. You've got to play the game, and the man plays the game better than anyone else. If there is anyone that we could learn from in terms of just approaching, and overcoming, some of the ideological deficits that exist between, bridging the gap between the right and the left, like, the guy is going to have some knowledge on that, and I think we should appreciate that. And I also think that, it's just nice to see, public figures talking about politics in a way that's not just dogmatic. Like, at least he's not he's not just telling you hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag, Me Too, or whatever, movement is popular at the time. He's actually talking about political discourse, and, that's really nice to see. So to respond to your question, am I going to read Eisel's book? Yes, if I get the opportunity, depending on how long it is, and I'll make a response. If you would like to see that, if you'd like to see me make a review of Eisel's book on politics, I'll do that. Yeah. I thought you were pretty based until I heard you were going to have vegan cheese for Christmas dinner. You clearly not had the right vegan cheese. That's the thing, right? There's a local business actually called Tyne Cheese, right? Fermented cashew cheese. Oh, so good. Unbelievable, amazing. Person who made it hadn't even tasted cheese before, from what I'm aware. And it's just the most delicious thing ever. Even if you it's not cheese, whatever. It is like a cheese, and it's delicious. It's genuinely delicious. People who aren't vegan who've tried it, I've give it to before, oh, this is lovely. It's gourmet as hell. It's £7 a box, but it's delicious. So it totally depends upon what you're having, man. If you're looking at vegan food, oh, it's disgusting, it's because you haven't had the right vegan food. It's you're not eating the right thing. It's not all, quote unquote omnivorous food tastes nice, does it? How many times have you've heard, you've complained about meat, dairy, or eggs being shit, depending on how it's cooked and how it's prepared and so on like that. It's exactly the same with vegan food, right? And they're all I can't even count. I think it's hundreds of thousands of edible plants in the world, and they're not all the same, right? You know what I mean? And how you prepare, these different, even extracts of plants, right? So if for example, with this vegan cheese I'm making, I'm probably going to add a little bit of lactic acid. Why am I adding a little bit of lactic acid? Sometimes lactic acid is called milk. Milk acid. And the reason for that is it has this sour taste, and it's produced when people ferment cheese. And so if I want my cheese to have a little bit of that sour taste, I add a little bit of lactic acid, and I have a more a similar cheese. But I don't like my cheese to be too sour. So now at least I have control over the way the cheese is going to be. So depending upon your palate, you can increase salt and so on like that. You can increase umami flavor by using things something that's high in glutamate, which mushrooms and stuff are high in. You can get shiitake mushroom powder and stuff like that. And understanding how food science, and the constructing of a flavor profile is important, I think, to constructing not only any really nice tasty meal. There's an art form to cooking, don't get me wrong, and not necessarily a science, but when we come to food science and constructing a flavor profile of what you want to eat, you can construct something which is just as delicious, if not more delicious, than an omnivorous alternative as a vegan, if you just take the time to know what you're doing. And there's a really great channel called Sauce Stash, who does loads of food science and stuff like that, and really great for vegan food meat replacements and cheese replacements and stuff like that. Really great. Yeast extract's great if you want a beefy flavor, if you you know what I mean. And it depends on what you want. I mean, half the time, right, you go if you get a packet of crisps, right, and if you look at the ingredients, it's bacon flavor. There's no bacon in it, right? It's yeast extract and stuff. The cheese that I was talking about was Tyne cheese. Brilliant. if you can, leave a note and tell them I sent you. I actually spoke to the guy that like works for them a few times. See him in the gym. They're really like good company. My dog's really excited. He's getting some beans. He didn't realize what was going on at first, and he's like hearing like this tin rustling, and then he's like, you know, like, so I'm probably gonna stay for like probably like 20 more minutes, maybe, guys, and then I'm gonna shoot off. Did you like the debate? I'm probably gonna like edit it down and then like, you know, put the debate up, like my review, and then the debate, and like, you know, like, tell us what you think. And obviously, if you would like to make a donation, you know, you see these kind of debates in the future, you want to see more content on the channel. It's only possible with the love and support of the community. But genuinely, it actually is only possible because of the support of the community, which makes even this whole thing possible. You genuinely are important. Also, I don't know if any of you, I hadn't actually mentioned this, but everyone who's participated in chat, everyone who's actually here watching this video is actually generating loyalty points in relation to my channel. And I've started a loyalty scheme on my channel, and you are automatically being given points. So when you subscribe, you're given like 100 points or like 200 points. When you donate, you are given points. You can check your points by typing in to chat. I'll one second, what's the command? I'll check. Let's see, you can check. See, it's exclamation mark and it's exclamation mark points. And you can check how many points you've actually generated. There is now a loyalty store, which is like these points are totally like free, guys, so you don't have to worry like pay for them or anything. Like if you do donate, you get them as well. You get like obviously the most if you donate. I made that the case because I'm not that stupid. But if you subscribe, you get points, and then when you get these points, like, and you grind yourself up these points, you can get Discord roles now. So I made separate text voice chat channels on my Discord server in relation to Plato's Republic. So if you want to be a member of the Bronze class or the Silver class, the Guardians, or the Gold, the Philosopher Kings, you can get enough. If you get points, you can spend them in the loyalty store, and then I will give you the roles on the Discord. It's kind of few points, because that's just the way things work. It's a game, so I'm gonna make you grind. That's just the way it works. You get like 100 points for subscribing, I think it is, or like 200 points for subscribing. I can tell you like the point system if you just want to know about it. So like 1 second. I think it's like a pretty cool system. I might end up reducing the cost of like maybe it's like some of the roles or something because I'm nice, but we'll see. Let's have a look. I think you get like 5 every 5 minutes you get like 5 points, or like 15 points, I think. Some for being active in chat. You get 10 points for being active in chat. You get 5 points for just watching. You get 200 points for a subscription. You get 200 points for membership. You get 400 points for a donation via Streamlabs, and you get 400 points for a donation via Super Chat. Yeah, I thought that was quite like a kind of fair system. So yeah. And obviously you can get your Discord roles, which give you like access to those like those tiers. And obviously I've made the tiers like rank up the same. So 5,000 for bronze, 10,000 for silver, 15,000 for gold. I will just let people buy straight to gold if they want, like, because obviously it's such a large investment. So if you want to generate enough points and go straight to gold, you will have access as well to like the silver and bronze like perks in that respect. So yeah. Yeah, let us know if you like the system. I think it's pretty fun. Like, you know what I mean? I'm a gamer myself. Like, so it's just like, it's like a nice fun game. Like, even think about new ways to like spend them. You can like create like gambling games and stuff. Oh, thank you very much. Question mark.
Question mark donated £5. Keep up the good work. I appreciate your content, buddy. Sincerely, your anti-natalist ally, Mark. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate it. I genuinely do. And yeah, like we should definitely have another conversation on anti-natalism. I wanted to talk to David Benatar. I really want to talk to David Benatar, so I want to see if I can get myself a conversation with the man himself. I think one of the main things, actually, funnily enough, is was it Julio Cabrera? Julio Cabrera? Am I saying? Yeah, I think it's his name. His arguments against Benatar's is one of the reasons I'm not an anti-natalist. I can't, like, don't get me wrong. I just don't think that it is wrong in all circumstances for people to have children. I think that people really need to consider whether they should have children. I think they need to think about like the ethical like dimensions of these things. Like, you know, if you have like a really crippling genetic disorder that you could pass on to your children that would ultimately lead them to live a life that may be like cruel and unusual, especially if it increases the likelihood of like infant death and like, you know, something like that, then you really need to consider whether you're having children, man. And like, at least I can say that the anti-natalists are at least in trying to engage people to see that like having children's not just a decision for yourself, it's a decision for the child and society. So yeah. Came for the philosophy, stayed for the points. Absolutely. I don't know if you've noticed, I called them Republic credits. I make myself, like, I basically, I'm just happy with myself. I make like little things for myself like that. So we'll have Republic credits as a Star Wars reference, and we have a loyalty system based upon Plato's Republic. So what we're going to do is have an intergalactic empire. So welcome to the empire, guys. I will be your Palpatine for this evening. But yeah, thank you again, Mark. I really appreciate it. China had one-child policy for many years. Seems dystopian, but might be worth thinking about. I don't think it's worth thinking about. I think it's like forced moral progress. Even if it was the better option to have, it doesn't work. Like the fact that people were leaving their children in dumpsters and stuff. Like it's honestly. It's disgusting, like the restriction of civil liberties. And it was something propagated by the Chinese state in the first place, from the propagation of trying to get as many, was a Chinese general that came up with the idea of trying to get people to breed as many, especially boys, as possible to bolster their military strength. And then ultimately, oh no, the people are, you know, having too many children all of a sudden. It's not good for the state. Well, fuck the people and do what's good for the state. Well, no, this kind of abstract good like dogmatism where we're just, the state tells you how to live, you're not really going to you're really not going to have any real you're not really going to have any real moral progress. And you're also taking advantage of individuals and not allowing them to engage with the moral reasoning. So like a lot of the time you're going to have like the rationality and the ethics behind the one-child policy was only questioned by those people who are in political office and control. So it was never really questioned because they're all ideologically biased towards the same thing. Oh yeah, Mark. Yeah, you've got like loads of points. I think like your points, Mark, as well. I think you probably got quite a few points because of you having donated before as well. So like you've donated before, so I think it must reflect that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, thanks again for the donation. And yeah, I'm absolutely a geek, 100% for absolute nerd. Like I've got, like, yeah, I'm just like absolutely. I'm trying to think if there's nothing actually in this room that reflects this. But I am, yes. I have like Star Trek stuff that like I need to put up. Perhaps morally encouraged but was a better option, but you still have certain families having 5+ kids, etc. I think like really what you have to do is just engage people rationally in like this, and get people to talk about ethics. Like people aren't even educated about the choices they're making. Like the people aren't engaged in philosophies, man. And this is the issue. Like we're expecting people to live their lives in a way that's good and right. We never even tell them, like we never even teach them about like different theories about good and right. So we just expect them to do something which they may never be educated in, and like we're hoping that families are going to educate them in it. And it's like, I'm sorry, but my faith, like so for example, on the estate that I grew up on, some people on that estate definitely should not have had children. I mean, fuck, I would go so far to say some people on that estate shouldn't have been bloody born with that behavior. Obviously I'm joking, like kind of, like, but I mean, like genuinely, like I don't mean to be nasty or anything, but like some of the behavior on the estate was atrocious, and inconsiderate of others, like vicious, malicious, that kind of thing. Some of it was to do with poverty. Some of it was to do with drug issues. Obviously, it's a working class estate. Well, actually, probably underclass estate. There's a lot of issues to do with poverty and the exploitation that they faced by the state in the first place, which has led them to these scenarios. And I'm sympathetic to that. It's like kind of like in gangster areas in the United States. It's like, I understand it's shit. Like, you know, they're being exploited to shit. And like their only hope is to like, you know, like that they're either stuck in this like shitty dead end job for the rest of their life where they're working till they die and they feel like empty and worthless, or they commit crimes to try and get that lifestyle which is being sold to them every day on the TV that they're watching. You know what I mean? And it's this like it's this issue, right? It's the same thing that was happening on the estate, but like you expect people to not fall into that trap, yet you don't even teach them how to see the fucking trap. And that's the point, right? Like they don't want people learning philosophy, and I say they, I mean like the government and like, you know, corporations and shit like that, because if people actually learned what was going on, they wouldn't be okay with it. Apart from Nozick, what are your favorite top 5 right-leaning thinkers? I actually don't know. I'll have to like construct the list, to be honest. Sovereign studies. I'll have to really just think about that. It depends on what you mean by right-leaning. The liberals count, because they're probably going to be liberals. They're going to be like Adam Smith and John Locke and people like that, like even John Rawls and stuff like that. Or do you mean like libertarians and stuff? Because then the list's going to become quite limited, if I'm honest. I mean, Ayn Rand's kind of there, like as a like, she's mental, and our politics is something I absolutely disagree with. But meta-ethics is pretty decent. Well, it's okay. It's okay. She raises some interesting points. Don't you find that life often makes it difficult to keep up ethics in mind while making life choices? I think that quite the opposite. I think that, but I don't actually. I do agree that it does make life, like ethics, is kind of alienated from us, in the sense that we've got so much to care about, and we're usually overwhelmed, and we're not in abstract thinking. Like, you know, how should I live? We're normally in that mode of like, I've got to get these bills paid. I've got to get the kids to school. I've got to make sure everything's okay. You know, and I'm stressed as shit. But at the same time, it is these questions about how we live our lives that make our lives worth living. In the words of Aristotle, not the words of Aristotle, in the words of Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And that's because if we get trapped in like these ideological prisons that like we're put in, then we end up like even causing ourselves unnecessary suffering. For example, like making life decisions that end up making our lives harder, or making decisions in life and blaming other people. I mean, like, look, how many like people do you see that are like racist, bigots, horrible people because they're either just following, you know, the ideology that's been said to them, or they are, you know, blaming, you know, like they took our jobs mentality. Like, you know, they're blaming like a certain group of individuals who they've been told to blame, rather than actually challenging the power structure that's actually oppressing them. And so ultimately, I would say like, yeah, okay, it's difficult to be like, ethical all the time, like really like engage in like critical thinking and stuff like that. But at the same time, doing it opens up a whole world of wonders and curiosities, and ultimately even has pragmatic uses. And it also prevents things like existential crisis, psychological issues that are the result of unethical living and the result of unexamined living. And it gives us the opportunity to like really examine the way that we're going to live our lives and act intentionally. And I think that I would say that yeah, like if we keep ethics in mind, we will live happier lives always, because we will feel the benefit of having purpose. And I think that like one of the big things is like in life, in today's like nihilistic, hedonistic kind of like society, this consumerism that, you know, buy happiness mentality, there is nothing that we are more in dire need of than a feeling of purposeful action, a feeling of freedom and true intentionality. Excuse me. I very well might have corona. I'm pretty sure I've got corona. Had like all the symptoms and everything. So it's, yeah. If you see a fat bloke on a settee in front of you or drinking Foster's, you know, ooh, fucking hell. Yeah, you leave the Northeast alone. I'll have you know that we were like without the Northeast, right? Like this country would be going nowhere. Okay, like I would say, like there is no place in England I would rather be than Newcastle. I love the Northeast. It's such a it is a brilliant place. It's full of people who are, to be honest, remarkably sincere, decent, hardworking people, intelligent people. And, you know, and honestly, I would take somewhere like Newcastle over somewhere like Manchester, London, Birmingham, any day. Not to say I don't like those places. I actually do. Maybe not London. Sorry, London. But that's just because it's just too big. It's just too damn big. It's too damn big. I can't really get by it. But in terms of capital cities, I'd say that the way Amsterdam functions. Amsterdam is such a well-planned city. It's honestly it's great. I love Amsterdam. Amsterdam is class. All right. You're from the Northeast. All right, you're allowed to say what you want. I'll do. That's fucking shit, right? No. I do. I'm just. You've got to defend the Northeast. Everywhere else hates one. I asked this question last stream, but wasn't sure if you answered because I was working in the background. But I was curious. What's your thought on deep ecology? Well, I actually had a debate, I remember, a while ago in my master's degree with a deep ecologist, a Norwegian, right? And from what I'm aware, like a lot of Norwegians are like full of like deep ecology because they have this they live next to like such natural beauty, right? Like if you've ever seen Norway, the country is just marvelous, right? It just looks beautiful, right? Don't get me wrong, I love the English countryside, you know, but at the same time, like Norway is like magnificent in terms of like mountains and like rivers and like it's just nature, isn't it? It's like wow. And you know it's a beautiful nation, and so they have this like, you know, this and obviously they're pagan in like ancestry, and I think that still like kind of runs within them a little bit. It's like reverence of nature is just like a little bit there, and I think that also I was debating this like deep ecologist that was in my master's degree, and I have respect for the position, but like for example, I don't hold like something like Leopold's land ethic or anything like that would like ultimately, like I don't think that there is any moral value in nature itself. I think value is dependent upon sentient beings. I would argue, I would 100% actually argue that value is dependent upon sentient beings. Like, so for example, the value of like a river isn't because of the river, it's because of the fish that live in it. It's because of the people who drink from it. It's because of the animals who drink from it. So like the river would be valueless without them sentient creatures. But he didn't agree. Until later on, he actually managed to come around. But he would argue that there was an inherent aesthetic value in nature, which I agreed with. I just said that like it's superseded by moral value, the ethical value. And then eventually he was like, well, could I have both? Ooh, are they vegan nuggies? They're vegan nuggies. Ooh, there's vegan nuggies, guys. I'm gonna go soon. But like, so there's like, you know, this like inherent aesthetic value, and I was like, yeah, sure, like absolutely. And I was like, as long as it's superseded by ethical value, I don't see the issue. And he's like, fair point, yeah. He's like, fair enough. But that was like during environmental philosophy during my master's degree. And honestly, I'd say that like my master's degree, like the conversations I had in environmental philosophy were probably the most interesting conversations I've had in academic philosophy as a whole. What's my opinion on Wittgenstein? Like his analytic philosophy. I think Wittgenstein's class. I mean, if we're gonna go for analytics, I'd say Wittgenstein's like, yeah, like I got taught Wittgenstein on a continental philosophy course. Like, you know, like who's not into Wittgenstein? Hi PP, have you ever looked at object-oriented ontology, and if you do, accept its critique of anthropocentrism? If not, how do we privilege the existence of subjects over objects? I haven't looked at that specifically, not at least I can remember. Oh, you've just bloody posted it again. I was getting to you, okay? You're just getting the points now, that's what... I would say, like, I've never read object-oriented ontology. I can kind of guess what it essentially is saying, and it sounds like quite like what Heidegger was saying with the fittingness of the concept, as if the object itself determines its phenomenological construction within the existential experience of the agent. The agent is compelled by the object. Am I right in saying that? Like, essentially, there is a right and wrong way to objectify reality determined by, you know, being itself. In which case, I'm all for that. I'm an objective idealist, man. Like, Hegel understands that shit. That's where we are. That's what we do. But yeah, I'm a PhD student. If not, how do you privilege the existence of subjects over objects? Well, this is the thing. Like, I don't think. I would say that, like, it's subject and object is the same thing. It's that subjectivity, understanding itself, and the thinking of itself is determined by the you know, the foundational thinking, which gives us you know, this first this ready to hand thrown experience. I hope that answers your question, Magnus. I really do. Just took epistemology and metaphysics and wrote my final on environmental philosophy. I do agree it's really interesting reading those perspectives, Law. Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think that, like, environmental philosophy is like, it's not dry. I can say that it's just not dry. It's really interesting because it's like real life scenarios. Like, we're facing environmental degradation, we're facing, like, you know, rainforest destruction, the destruction of, like, oceans, the destruction of you know, not only habitats, but even how it's affecting, you know, the movement and migration patterns of humans and other individuals, and like human geography, which is incredibly interesting. And, you know, hello to my friends who do human geography. I don't know if you'll ever see this stream, but yeah, you know, do appreciate the subject. I very much enjoyed human geography. And so, like, the philosophical impacts of those things, like, in terms of environmental philosophy, it's incredibly important, and it's interesting, and it's relevant to today. Talk with Morgoth. As well, I'm not going to talk with anyone who will construct a dark empire in Middle Earth. Okay. The Balrog was enough. Okay. When we talk about, like, you know, this evil tyrant king, I don't know if that's a good idea. But no, I'm joking. Like, so apparently he's a Hegelian or / Heideggerian, and he has arrived at very different positions. I'll happily talk to him. Yeah. What positions does he differ from me on? Is it veganism? I bet it's veganism. I bet he's not even a moral realist. Would you be up for talking to a philosophy lecturer named Aaron Yarmel? He's a vegan utilitarian. Absolutely. I would love to talk to him. We can talk about how utilitarianism's wrong. No, but yeah, I'll happily talk to him. Yeah, let's get him on. I'm majoring in environmental science and philosophy. Feel the passion all the way around. Yeah, man, that's really interesting. That's really useful. Like, you're actually the kind of people that we need in society. People who are going to stop, hopefully, destroying the nature and the bedrock of society. Can aesthetic value ever outweigh the moral? You didn't tell us if I answered the question. Sovereign studies. You can at least tell us whether I at least answered the first question right. Well, like, irrelevantly. I know you would blow up a planet of plants to save a single animal, but would you shoot an arsonist to save the Louvre? Ooh, that's a difficult one. Would I shoot an arsonist to save the Louvre? Does the moral harm of losing the French, of losing the history and the artwork, which is bedrock to culture and like the identity of many individuals within France and around the world, does that compare to a life? I'd say it's moral harm, but is the moral harm enough to take an individual's experience from them in order to preserve something that is ultimately of aesthetic value to individuals, but arguably it's all been backed up digitally anyway now. I mean, it's not like the artwork's gone forever. It's just the originals are gone. Yeah, no, I wouldn't shoot him. No, I wouldn't. You get an absolute slap, though. I can tell you that. Yeah, an absolute slap. Hello. May I ask what you would recommend some essential resources / material for someone who wants to begin learning about philosophical idealism? Learning about idealism. I learned it from primary literature, so I'm trying to really think about giving you something that is not so terrible. Okay. I would say maybe a reader's guide on Kant's Kant's critique of pure reason. Talking about apperception, maybe. I don't know if that's actually the best. That might be a terrible way to do it. But maybe like a reader's guide on Kant. Actually, is there not like a very short introduction to idealism? Can I not just recommend you like something like that? Because that just might idealism, a short introduction. I've now read it, like, but German idealism, very short introductions. That's probably where I would start. Look, I've now read it, but like, everyone I'm going to recommend you is going to make you want to twist your own head off your neck. So essentially, yeah, I'd probably start there. Actually, you know what? Like, beyond anything, what am I doing, man? Here. I'll send you exactly what you need to read. Okay, I want you to go and read. Where has my stream gone? Where am I? You need to read. Okay, go and read that. And go and read that, and then when you're done, read a short introduction to Hegel. That's basically where you should be. Oh yeah, shit, me nuggies. Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, I'm actually gonna go. But wait a minute, did I tag you in that? Ron A, look at those links. Those links are for you. Okay. Yeah, I do plan on starting the book club again sometime in the future. Yeah, Hegel was a carnist, unfortunately, but he was from the 17th century. He was also sexist. We'll judge people of history with their own ethical standards. But yeah, it doesn't mean we can't even learn from their positions. Take it easy. Take it easy, guys. But I'm gonna shoot off now in a second anyway. And yes, PP, you were right on the money object or the money object oriented ontology is neo strain of Heidegger. All right, cool. Right, yeah, right, sweet. I'm glad. Yeah. So if anyone wants to support the channel, remember you can do so by donating via the Streamlabs donation link. You can also get yourself a couple of points in the process. You can also donate by the tip jar. You can also buy my course. You can just help out any way you can. It's always appreciated. If you want as well to be notified of me streams and so on, subscribe so that you know that these streams are happening. I'm going to be streaming every day until Christmas, so keep an eye out. And also, if you want to, join the Discord server, I don't think there's a link, but I will go and post one. So yeah, one second. Yeah, just come join the Discord server. It's quite fun. We've got a lot of people on there, discuss philosophy. Meet people with like-minded interests who want to discuss philosophy in an environment which is accepting and in an environment which is genuinely engaging. I hope that at least other people feel the way about the Discord, but I do feel that the Discord environment is quite communally accepting of other positions and sincere to them. So but thank you everyone for watching. Remember to hit like, subscribe, and as always,